Antimage and Isekai LitRPG Adventure, Ends of Magic Book 1, audiobook by Kevin Chapter 62. A growing spark. Stella was immediately engaged, coming over to study the machine in detail. After a minute, she looked perplexed. Okay, what does this have to do with lightning? Nathan pointed to the two wires coming off the brush. When I spin this handle, those wires will get charged. Not strongly, you would need to touch them together for there to be a spark. But this device is a way to demonstrate the basic principles I was talking to you about. She merits a warning, Arl complained from the side of the room. I understand the lay of the land. I just get shocked. Stella turned and stuck her tongue out at Arl but turned back quickly. She grabbed the two wires and gestured for Nathan to turn the crank. He leaned his back into it, spinning up the generator and keeping it moving fast. Stella started tapping the wires together, giggling as small sparks zapped. After a minute, he slowed down and the sparking stopped. Stella stood up, excited. Okay, great, so tell me how this works. Nathan grabbed a slate and sat down. So I told you before that when you have a moving magnetic field that creates an electric field, right? That's what's going on here. It's invisible, so you can't see the field, but I can draw about what they would look like. Now, before we start looking at why that happens, we need to go over the basics of how electric and magnetic fields work. Nathan pulled out the two magnets and handed them to Stella. Have you run across these before? Stella blinked, then took the magnets, sticking them together and then pulling them apart with a bit of effort. Yeah, though they're not used for much. Not magical, and they mess with some kinds of magic in weird ways. My dad has a couple of them, but more as curiosity pieces than anything else. Nathan pointed at the magnets fastened to the inside of the generator. They were almost touching the spinning coils of copper wire. They're sources of magnetic fields, but not a simple monopole. Here, let me draw what it looks like. Nathan started explaining the basics of magnetic fields, sprinkling some iron filings around the magnet on a table to demonstrate how the filings gathered on the magnet. He spent a few minutes spreading them out, showing how they followed the magnetic field lines. Now we're in the meat of it, but this is still going to take a while. Low-tier lecturing 9 achieved. Several days later, Nathan was eating lunch with the rest of the heirs. He had something to celebrate. He'd been running suicide drills the other day, pushing the limit of what stamina and rage could do for his physical abilities, and incorporating a single, rapid handspring into each cycle. Mid-tier sprinting 5 achieved. Low-tier tumbling 9 achieved. It had been a pleasant surprise, but Nathan supposed the training had been pretty intense, probably beyond anything that a human on Earth could hope to accomplish. As a matter of fact, he was still thinking about it, and considering if there were more intensive training drills he could do for tumbling when Simla approached. His team had just come back from their own surprise mission and were basking in the praise of the other trainees. Simla stepped up and addressed Nathan. No more monsters in our way before graduation, eh? You ready to swear the adventurer's oath in a few weeks, Nathan? Nathan looked at Simla and cocked his head. What is the adventurer's oath, Simla? Simla shrugged. You're not from Gemor, true enough. It's the oath we swear at the end of training. It used to be sworn at the first solstice after the blooding patrol, but I suppose that's what this is now, hey? He ticked off on his fingers. Around here, the guildmistress is the one to tell the tale of endings, and then we swear on the endings to defend Gemor. Not too high a bar, is it? Nathan looked around at the other heirs. Arl shrugged expressively. Nobody seemed to know where Simla was going with this. A few other people in the room were paying attention, but not very many. If Simla was trying to make this a grand confrontation, his stage presence needed work. Nathan looked up at the golden-eyed man. I will swear that oath. Simla clapped him on the shoulder. Good, I'll see you there. I have the feeling I missed something. Nathan turned to the other heirs. Anybody know what that was about? Is the adventurer's oath a big deal? Kacha shrugged. It is and it isn't. Traditional adventurers put great stock in dividing the adventurers who have sworn and those who haven't. That is how Sudriel took over the guild, to raise the past to the present. When Khazar was the guildmaster, he would prevent people from swearing the oath if they were not traditional enough. A cruel line to draw. He shook his head sadly. Hear me, but a fine fighter does not always make for a fine guildmaster. It was a good thing when the rest of the council kicked out Khazar and Sudriel replaced him. She made it into an application. Any who have adventured for Gemor and protected its interests can climb to the top of Gemor and swear upon the seal at the solstice. And any who finish the training process, of course. Nathan raised his eyebrows. What's the seal? Sarah answered. It's an enchanted stone disc at the top of Gemor. Looks like a big stone portal set flat into the top of the mountain. Doesn't do anything but light up on the solstice. I'd offer to show you, but it's one hell of a climb and the guards would probably stop us. One of the duties of the guard is to protect the seal. Every day but the solstice, that is. Stella chimed in. I'd ask my parents to fly us up, but well, she waved at Nathan, sighing dramatically. Not something you can do. Maybe eventually I'll be able to throw you that far. Ha ha, well, I'll see it at graduation. A few days later, Kadid was waiting for Nathan when the heirs broke from their group practice. The old man greeted Nathan by muttering something about not enjoying being an errand boy, but with a small grin that suggested he wasn't mad. They warmly gripped each other's forearms and walked towards Beatrid's shop. Beatrid and Herden have been dangerously quiet about what they are working on, Kadid probed. When you first mentioned the topic, you said it would involve an insight, but I didn't realize it would be this big. Something to bring Herden out of retirement. I ask myself, what could have interested that old crone so? And I think it couldn't be a new weapon, no indeed. She's worked on every weapon under the sky and invented some herself. My guess is a way to make alcohol from thin air. That woman is a demon with her infusions. Nathan shrugged. We've sworn to not talk about it, so I won't say squat. Kadid laughed, then shook Nathan's shoulder lightly. And it seems you won't. I wish you luck, whatever you're doing. It seems you're becoming a true friend of the bows. Most of us may not fly as high as the parents of your new friends, but we're the blood of Gemor. Stay safe, Nathan Lark. With that, Nathan walked into Beatrid's shop. Kadid closed and locked the door behind him as Nathan entered the workshop. Poppy, Herden, and Beatrid were all sitting around a workbench towards the back, admiring the items on the table. Nathan had only been here once since he'd picked up the generator from Beatrid, and it had primarily been to learn about curses from Herden. As part of that, she'd given him a lesson on how enchantments worked. They weren't a spell, and the mana flows in spells and enchantments weren't even that alike. An enchantment guided mana so that a spell was cast, but it was like the difference between encoding a function into an operation on a chip and building the function from component parts of code. That analogy, and understanding the difference, had awarded Nathan with a skill rank up. Mid-tier spell sense 6 achieved. Then they had moved along to practical curse breaking. The old enchanter had brought along a dagger with a curse that made the handle stick to your hand. There was a mundane sharpness enchantment woven into the weapon, and the challenge was to break the curse while preserving the other enchantment. Herden had tried to teach Nathan how to crack open the hilt to get at the enchantments, but he just grabbed the hilt and felt out the magic with magic absorption. He tried to isolate the curse from the sharpness enchantments, but had ended up breaking both and leaving the weapon drained dry. Herden had been surprised, to say the least. She'd grilled Nathan a bit about his talent, but backed off when he mentioned it was a unique insight. Then, she'd loaned Nathan a few other cursed items she had to see if he could figure out how to curse break them. He'd practiced in both figuring out what the enchantments did, and figuring out how to break the curse while leaving alone the useful enchantments. The items themselves were interesting, representing a range of styles and methods. There was a spear from Agman that could kick out a powerful blast of force but would turn and cut an unauthorized wielder. A low-tier dagger from a fortress of the face had a self-maintaining blade of incredible sharpness, but tried to brand a rune onto anybody who picked it up without thick gloves. Then there were a pair of amulets from some unnamed southern ruins that could generate bubbles of air around the wearer's head, but the curse would make that air toxic. He managed to keep one of those functional and was a bit sad to give it back to Herden afterwards. Mid-tier Identify 3 achieved. Anyway, Nathan was here again and was surprised to see the workshop in a much cleaner state. Many of the prototypes had been cleared away. Sitting on the table were 3 guns, all beautifully crafted. On the left side were a matched pair of revolvers, gleaming steel etched with flowing lines that glowed a delicate blue. The handles were made of a light wood that had been inlaid with dark metal to form magical symbols that reminded Nathan of lowercase Greek letters. They were big weapons, more than a foot long. The barrels were wide and extended, with a pair of stubby iron sights rising from the top. Next to the guns lay a set of plain wooden speed loaders, little bullet holders that could be used to reload an entire cylinder at once. On the right side of the table was the rifle. It wasn't as decorated as the revolvers, though it shared the glowing blue tracery up the barrel, as well as the dark metal inlaid into the grip around the handle. The rifle looked longer and heavier than hunting rifles from Earth, but otherwise had about the same profile, no scope, though, just another pair of iron sights. In the middle of the table sat several wooden boxes of different sizes marked with simple labels. Most of them were wide, flat boxes labeled normal revolver ammunition. A few larger boxes said normal rifle ammunition. Then there was one smaller box each of explosive and penetrating ammunition for the rifles. Nathan paused to appreciate the sight. "That's quite a display, very nice." Herden cackled and clapped her hands together. "Indeed it is. A gift to the daughter of Stainel Cruson should be beautiful, and as the first example of a new weapon it must set the tone. Now then, I will need to be present for the initial imprinting of these weapons to activate the self-destruct. When is that going to happen?" Nathan paused, thinking. "I need to set up a time. I'll tell Cadid when I know. It might be as early as tomorrow night. Does that work for you all? It will almost certainly be at the Caxal mansion, where Cullel and Dallo live." Poppy and Beetrid glanced at each other before Beetrid spoke. "Looking forward to it." They talked about some last-minute details before Herden started fishing for any more insights that Nathan might be willing to share. Beetrid had described the basics of the generator, and Herden seemed very interested in the knowledge behind it. She took a polite refusal well enough, though Nathan had second thoughts as he looked back to the guns. "I wonder if she can make a rail gun, or a coil gun. The problems with those on Earth were always a need for a lot of current at once and material issues. Having seen a good enchanter at work, I bet those issues are surmountable with magic. I would probably need to teach her a good deal of the same math I'm going through with Stella, though. Something to consider for the future." Nathan asked for a brief rundown of the ammunition, curious as to the final form factor. Beetrid described the regular ammunition, pulling out a few cartridges. The revolver round was big, almost a half-inch across with a dome-shaped lead bullet capped by a steel ball. The rifle round was enormous, almost as long as Nathan's hand. The bullet was the same diameter but much longer, capped with another ball of steel. Herden explained that she'd had to strengthen the chamber and barrel to prevent the charge of powder from cracking the barrel, and added force enchantments to dampen the recoil. Then the older woman took over describing the enchanted bullets, opening up the smaller boxes. There were only a dozen of each enchanted rifle cartridge, with about twice as many revolver cartridges. The 2 different kinds looked identical in construction, more cylindrical than the normal bullets, though they each had a pointed lead front. The bullets themselves were stamped with a small symbol to tell them apart. Herden was excited about these, holding up a penetrating revolver round. I stacked up 9 engraved discs for the enchanted bullets. It easily went through 4 inches of steel and far into the ground. Beatrice held up a metal ingot, which had a notable bullet hole all the way through. Herden kept talking. The enchantments are only one use, but they should enhance one another. A muckgrabber can eat my foot if the rifle penetrator doesn't go through a foot of steel. We haven't tested it since somebody didn't have a foot of steel lying around. She held up one of the explosive rounds. These are based on a one-shot crossbow fireball enchantment. Supposed to stick into the target and then detonate. I had to shorten the time. But when we shot a wood block, it blew it to splinters from the inside. Very exciting. Nathan praised Herden, Poppy, and Beatrice for their work before heading back to the Adventurers Guild. The crafters would bring the guns to the event Nathan had to set up. That evening, Nathan schooled himself to patience until all the heirs were back. Stella was the last one. She staggered in looking exhausted. Nathan popped the question. "Hey, Sarah, I think your new weapons are ready. They're downright amazing. You ready to see them?" Sarah twisted to look at him from where she was busy whittling another small wooden figurine. This one looked like a small stalker. "Multiple? I thought you were making me one." Nathan shrugged. "Plans changed. Stella, do you think we can do it at your parents' place? I mentioned before that I wanted privacy." The bedraggled mage looked over from where she had collapsed on a couch. "What? Oh, sure. I'll ask them tomorrow. So long as they don't make me do channeling practice again. Got some more rank ups though, so it was worth it no matter how scummy I feel." Sarah was excited. "I would prefer it to happen sooner rather than later. I want to experience weapons from another world." Nathan noticed Arl frowning. He was bent over a slate, working on more math. "He's really the only one of the heirs I don't have a plan to power up in some way. I mean, maybe the cursed swords are cool, but I have no idea how they'll stack up against the armory of weapons he already has. Anyway, he's kind of a greatsword guy, if you know what I mean." Nathan smirked a bit at his own double entendre. "I just can't think of anything beyond getting Arl some new weapons. Maybe I can ask Herden to enchant a sword, but if it's an enchantment she has, then she's probably already figured out the best ways to use it and I won't be able to contribute much. And if I understand her, she'd refuse to do it because it would be boring. I'll need to think about whether it's worth trading her an insight on electricity in order to get a momentum greatsword. Or maybe I can come up with something. A monomolecular blade would be cool and all, but I have no idea how to make or maintain that kind of edge. Steel won't cut it. You know, I have no idea why I'm waiting on trying to disentangle the curse from the swords. Let's give that a go." Nathan stood up, crossing over to the cabinet that held various odds and ends. One of the items inside was a thick sack containing the cursed swords. He pulled it out. "Hey, Arl, you got a moment? I want to try something, but if you're busy it can wait." The master of melee let loose a frustrated sigh, putting down his chalk-dusted slate. "Indeed, happy to have an excuse to take a break. What are you thinking?" He saw Nathan pulling out the bag containing the cursed swords and raised his eyebrows. "I was wondering what you were planning on doing with those. Only fair you take them as your claim of the loot, but I thought you couldn't use magical items, even if the curse on those won't hurt you." Nathan set the bag carefully on the table. The generator setup had been moved to his room, so there was space. "I don't think they're for me. I cannot use magical items without breaking them pretty quickly. I don't think I want to develop my talent to change that. But these swords look fancy. I want to try to break the curse, then give them to you." Arl was visibly surprised by that, his eyebrows climbing as he looked at Nathan. He tried to refuse the offer. "They seem to be very fancy swords, but that is not necessary." He paused. "I truly was joking yesterday about asking for something." Nathan carefully tugged the bag off from the swords. careful not to touch them as they clattered to the top of the table, still sheathed. He'd examined them a bit earlier without touching them, trying to get a sense of the enchantments inside. But he had to admit that they really were very fancy. They looked like a pair of fine sabers with impeccable craftsmanship that seemed to cut above everything else they'd salvaged from the Mage Lord's tomb. Shame about the curse. Nathan looked up from inspecting the swords, meeting Arl's eyes. No, you were right. This isn't about balancing the scales. I have the capability to try and help you, so I will. Friends don't count favors. Then Nathan grabbed the handles of the cursed swords. Mid-tier earnestness 9 achieved. Chapter 63, Weaponry in Motion. Nathan held onto the hilts of two extremely cursed weapons. On the one hand, he should. V definitely tried to break the curses on the swords one at a time, so that if he failed on the first, he could apply any lessons learned to the second. On the other hand, the swords were part of a set, and it seemed wrong to not treat them as such. Nathan had wondered if the curse would detect him and trigger at all, given that some of Herden's practice weapons hadn't triggered when he grabbed them. It had made it harder to break the curses, since it was difficult to separate the inactive curse from the other enchantments. That quickly proved to not be a problem. The swords pulsed some sort of detection magic at his hands. Nathan recognized what kind of spell it was he'd seen, and heard enough about the self-destruct mechanism on the guns to piece together that this was something similar. The enchantments to enable that magic weren't visible on the hilts of the swords any more than they were on the guns. It was obviously a bad idea to make your security runes visible, though some of Herden's cursed items had worked that way. Regardless, the appraiser and enchanter who had looked over these swords had decided it wasn't worth the risk to break the curses. The enchantments checked if Nathan was the proper wielder and determined that he was not. The flesh-dissolving spell started to bite at Nathan's hands, but he understood death mana well at this point, and it amounted to barely a tickle. The spell ramped up in intensity as Nathan drew the sabers from their sheaths. The swords were beautiful, artistic curves of shining metal without any engravings. The single sharp edge seemed to drink the light, steaming with faint, dark tendrils. Are the enchantments inside the blades somehow? Nathan held the swords crossed in front of him as he furrowed his brow, concentrating on the feeling of magic playing around his hands and creeping up his wrist. The sword hilts contained a mess of spellwork, and Nathan closed his eyes as he constructed a mental model of what was going on. He tried to keep his antimagic from breaking anything before he understood the enchantments, but he felt the enchantments closest to his hands starting to fray. There were smoothed crystals of necromancy-charged conductive quartz embedded in the hilt and touching his palms, which linked to more enchantments farther up the blade. Those crystals were full of death mana, and Nathan tried to prevent his magic absorption from draining them dry just yet, not before he understood more about the overall structure. The talent wasn't built for fine control, but Nathan focused his willpower on reducing the absorption. There were spells strung throughout the handles for all kinds of purposes. Some reinforced the handle to make it less likely to break. Others prevented the blade from slipping and wicked away moisture. Mid-tier spell sense 7 achieved. The crystals are the key. They fuel all the other enchantments and don't have their own charging mechanism. This weapon has only a limited charge unless you can fuel it with death mana. I bet that's why Neverin wasn't interested, because the crystals integrated into the sword are death-aspected, so that would be impossible to change. For anybody, that's not me. But if I just rip the mana out, it'll probably break all the enchantments. Mid-tier Identify 4 achieved. Man, analyzing spells while they try to eat me is great for skill ranks. I'm taking a risk to solidify new knowledge, so that's helping. Nathan kept the drain on the crystals low, but constant. He tried not to give the enchantments any sudden shocks. After that was established, Nathan focused on disentangling the magic that was trying to eat his hands. It was a race against time as his antimagic fractured and absorbed the other spellwork in the handle. The entire structure of the interlocking spells quivered, and Nathan's lips pursed as he tried to stabilize the structure and target only the spellwork that was directing the death mana into a disintegration field that now reached nearly to his elbows. It was like trying to stabilize a Jenga tower when the only tool you had was a pickaxe. He heard the heirs moving around, but he didn't spare them any attention. The crystals were almost drained of mana, which meant Nathan was nearly out of time. He recalled how he'd broken Tial's early spells and latched his talent onto the threads of destructive power that were wrapping around his flesh. Then he gave a metaphysical yank. The spellwork in the sword quaked, but Nathan followed the propagation of his pull on the disintegration spell. Mid-tier notice 6 achieved. Got you. Nathan pulsed his antimagic into the hilt of the sword, targeting the specific flows of mana that likely made up the security curse. That part of the spellwork fragmented, and Nathan cast the swords away from him. The crystals were out of mana, but he'd destroyed the curse, and he guessed he'd only broken 1 or 2 additional enchantments along the way. High-tier focused mind 6 achieved. Nathan opened his eyes to see that the heirs had vacated the room. One of the swords had sunk into the table in front of Nathan. Though it wasn't exactly a whole table anymore, it seemed that the disintegration spell hadn't just focused on him but tried to get at everything nearby. It had eaten the sleeves of his shirt back to the elbows and taken a large chunk out of the table. The second sword had clattered to the floor after Nathan released it. The edge was shinier than before. Without the death mana empowering whatever enchantments were on the blade, it no longer sucked in the light. Did it work? Kache spoke from the side of the room, looking in with some exasperation. Nathan reached down to grab the sword, then thought better of it. I think so. I'm almost certain the curse enchantment is gone, but I don't know if the rest of the enchantments still work. Either way, I completely emptied the mana reservoir. I think it can be recharged with another kind of mana now. Maybe. Stella poked her head around the corner now that the fireworks were over. Oh, that's weird. I'd be surprised if the spells all still worked if you charged it with a different kind of mana. But if they were built well, maybe. Ara walked forward, looking excited. He poked at the sword that was sticking out of the table tentatively. When nothing happened, he slid it out without effort. He admired the blade for a moment before delicately placing it on the table and bending to pick up the other sword of the pair. Stella walked over, looking at the swords. Yeah, definitely uncharged. I think I can charge those with mana, though you won't be able to change the aspect unless Nathan drains them again. I don't know exactly how the enchantments work though, so I don't know what different kinds of mana would do. Well, there should be a good enchanter around when I give Sarah her new weapons, Nathan said. We can probably ask her. Arl picked up both swords, feeling at their balance for a moment. It would be nice to have weapons that have specific magical effects. Most of mine have durability and sharpness enchantments, but Stainel has made it clear that he won't just gift us any of the truly potent weapons, those we need to earn. He slipped the swords into his dimensional pouch, or be given by a teammate. Thank you, Nathan. I will think about what mana I wish to put into these weapons. I am leaning towards a different type in each, but I will wait to speak to this enchanter first and see what is compatible. Both he and Sarah looked towards Stella, who was yawning. The mage jumped at their attention, realizing they were waiting for her response. Right. I'll ask my parents if we can invite everybody next time I see them. Stupid message spell, I just ask them now, but I still can't cast it. It's really hard to cast with air mana. Would be a lot easier with shadow or dreams, or one of the other silly and insubstantial mana types. The ones I don't have. The next day, another team returned from their surprise mission. The rest of the trainees had started to wise up, acquiring rations and camping gear in case they were sent out into the wilderness at a moment's notice. The latest team to return was a group of trainees called the Dust Eaters, a few humans and catfolk from the southern villages. They were telling the story of their mission in the dining hall, and Nathan scooted over to listen. Their leader was somebody Nathan had met in passing before, a young human man named Nornan. He was a bit of a jokester, and a large group of trainees were listening to him with smiles on their faces. And then, Inarl tripped over a rock and started a small rock slide, Nornan declaimed, recounting how they'd tracked a group of ashblood cobras to their lair. It was like the opening of a dragon's maw. All dozen serpents turned towards us and hissed, fit to make your grandmother's bones shake. Hear me, but I was sure they'd swarm us. Nathan stepped up to the group, smiling. This guy had flair. Did they swarm you? The pale-skinned man turned towards Nathan, blonde mop swinging. He raised a finger. Aha, you would think so, but we'd prepared. We were on the steeper of the slopes, and the slope was covered with loose scree, so they couldn't simply slither up to us. After I gallantly helped Inarl to her feet, we beat a hasty retreat to the top of the hill, peppering them with poisoned arrows. A catfolk to Nornan's left swatted at him. By my memory, you screamed like a piglet and shot them a dozen times without helping me at all. Nornan turned on her with a radiant smile. But that was helping you up since they were slowed by my incredible marksmanship. I got one arrow right down one's throat. Must have given it terrible indigestion. Everybody was laughing at Nornan's incredibly bombastic story, including his own team. That guy's great. Nathan hung around, meeting some of the other adventurers and learning their names. The Dust Eaters specialized in ranging the drier desert region to the south of Gemor, and Nathan wasn't surprised to hear that Nornan had been the one to choose the name. It didn't take long to set up another small dinner party at the Caxal's place. Stella made it clear that not nearly as many people were invited this time. It was just going to be Dalo, Kullal, Stainel, Kia, and whoever Nathan brought in addition to the heirs. It won't be Kanta's cooking, Stella had informed them apologetically, but we'll have some good food. Nathan wasn't worried about food. He was worried about presenting a gun to the famous weapon master of Davrar. What if he didn't find it very interesting? Nathan told himself that it had been impressive to Beatrid, Poppy, and Herden, so it should be impressive to Stainel. Nathan had asked Cadid to inform Beatrid and Herden about the party. He was expecting the older man to complain about being asked to pass a message, but Cadid had taken the request in stride. Then, he'd said something interesting. It appears that you are making valuable connections between my family and the most powerful adventurers in this city. I thank you for this, Nathan. Nathan met up with all three crafters at Beatrid's shop before they set off to the Caxal estate. Nathan ended up carrying a stack of unenchanted ammunition boxes, carefully. Poppy carried the rest of the ammunition, while Beatrid toted the guns in a cushioned sack. On the way, Nathan mentioned that he'd uncursed a pair of swords and wanted Herden to take a look. The old woman sniffed disdainfully. Get another enchanter for that. I've spent enough of my time hunched over old enchantments, trying to figure out how they work. What's the source of the swords? They're Sklian Dominion. We think they were the personal arms of a magelord. Found them in a hidden treasure room right off where he was buried. Yeah, buried as the power core and intelligence of a giant Nagamek. Herden shook her head slightly, sending her mane of poofy white hair shaking. Sklians were shit enchanters. Those swords are probably packed with rare materials used poorly. Might get more selling the raw materials now that the curse is broken. She still doesn't seem interested. Well, time for a bit of bait. Nathan grinned at the elderly enchanter. She looked back with narrowed eyes. I know that look. You think you have something interesting. I will decide that, indeed I will. Well, the swords were loaded with death mana, Nathan explained, but I think they're unaspected now. We want to know if they can be recharged with a different kind of mana and if the enchantments will still work. Herden sniffed. No, The aspected nature of whatever they were using as a mana storage will make the whole thing blow up. Basic shit, boy. She paused and glanced at him again. Unless the storage material was prismatic diamond. But if it was, then it would be a crime to leave that material in a Sklian sword. It wasn't a prismatic diamond, was it? Nathan's grin didn't slip. No, it was high-quality conductive quartz. But what if I told you that the quartz doesn't have an aspect any longer? No trace of death mana to be found. Ready to be charged with any other mana. And we want to know if the enchantments on the sword will still work with other mana types. Herden frowned in thought. Right. Whatever weird magic stuff you do, I'd have to take a look. It's not many enchantments that could cope with that. But the Sklians tended to build their enchantments sturdy, if stupid. So maybe. She paused, then swore. Harpy's tits, Nathan. Fine, I'll take a look at this sword. And if you've managed to remove the aspect from a mana storage, I might call in this favor one day for a project of mine. The old woman was moderately grumpy for the rest of the walk to the Caxal's mansion, but Nathan could tell it was mostly an affectation. She didn't want people asking her about enchanting all the time, so she acted grumpy about it. But she liked enchanting and couldn't help getting involved when somebody presented her with an interesting problem. They approached the front gates to Stella's house. The gates and walls sparked with lightning, just like last time. But as they walked up, the gates opened and they could pass inside to the garden. Nathan spied Dallo and Cullel sitting inside on a bench set to the side among the lush growth. Cullel was sprawled idyllically against Dallo's chest, and they were both admiring the verdant beauty around them. They both stood as Nathan and the crafters approached. Dallo nodded in their direction. Herden, I haven't heard from you for long enough. I assumed you were dead. The old woman snorted. Retired, not dead. Dallo stroked his beard in her direction. It's hard to tell the difference. Your activities were loud enough that their sudden absence invoked a death. Herden just glared at him. At least you're not like Khazar. Damned fool bothers me every week to make more shit for him. I told him to go lick a muckgrabber's asshole last time. Dallo chuckled, stroking his beard in a dignified fashion. That lasted until Cullel leaned in and licked his ear, making him start. Dear, she said. Let's invite them in, let them put down those heavy boxes. The old man snorted. Nathan's got stamina, he'll be fine. Regardless, the crotchety man turned and walked towards the front door. Cullel stayed behind in the garden to let other people through the front gates. Everybody else followed Dallo, and he led them downstairs to the practice room in the basement. They set everything down on a table in the viewing area, then sat around to wait for Stanel and Kia and the other members of the heirs. Stella joined them after a few minutes. Sorry I missed you arriving. I was busy reading in the library. Is this it then? She gestured to the clutter of boxes on the table. Nathan nodded. He almost moved to open the bag when Beatrice stopped him. Let's wait until all are present, yeah. It didn't take long before Sarah clattered down the stairs and popped into the basement room. She looked excited. Stanel was close behind, his heavy tread and bemused expression signaling that his expectations weren't as high as his daughter's. Then again, she knows these weapons were invented on another world, while he does not. Arl walked in behind, followed by Kacha and his mother, and the gang's all here. Well, except for Leska and Zarian. They're guardians but don't have kids in the heirs. Beatrice looked over to Nathan, silently asking if he wanted to start. He shrugged and stepped out into the practice area, turning to address the gathered heirs and guardians. It felt a bit like giving a lab meeting. Not really that different in a way. I've been working on something new for a while, and now it's time to explain to an audience of my peers what I've been spending time and money on, and convince them it was good and worthwhile. Then ask for their input and hope they find it useful. Chapter 64, Guns and Blades. Nathan stood in front of the majority of the guardians of Gemor and the heirs. He rubbed his hands together, psyching himself up to introduce their presentation on firearms. Let's get started. We're here to present a new kind of weapon that I've been working on with Beatrid, Poppy, and Herden for a while now. It's something from my home, and I think it will be a valuable weapon in Sarah's arsenal that will complement her build well. This weapon is the primary armament in my home, to such an extent that other kinds of weapons are comparatively rare. He paused to ensure that he had everybody's full attention, then gestured towards where Beatrid and Poppy stood next to the table of guns. Of course, I only had the insight of this weapon. I didn't have the skill or skills to make it. Beatrid Bow and Poppy Miri did all the hard work here, and Herden Bow handled the enchanting. I must say they did a fabulous job recreating something that I only remembered. Much of the credit should go to them. At this point, they can make more by themselves, though they will need my permission. The dark-skinned enchanter heckled from the audience, where she was already sipping on a dark blue cocktail. Blasphemously lucky of you I was bored. Nathan raised an eyebrow at her. I seem to remember you thanking me for a new challenge. Anyway, Beatrid's the one who's done most of the testing, and I don't want to touch the weapon because it's enchanted, so she'll demonstrate. He waved Beatrid forward and she grabbed the bag of guns. Poppy hoisted cases of ammunition for both the rifle and the revolvers before following. Nathan sat down in the viewing area next to Stella. Sarah was in front of them, paying rapt attention. Stella leaned in and whispered to him. After all this, it better be a weapon fit to wake the giants. Nathan smirked as Beatrid put down the bag and fished out a revolver. She turned towards them. Can I get a target? Something sturdy for practicing ranged attacks on, and with a backstop. Cullel gestured, and a man-shaped mannequin of dark wood flew out of a closet, settling on the far side of the room. An inclined plane of force materialized behind it. Beatrid looked nervously at the target. This weapon is hard to explain, so I will demonstrate. Poppy had popped open the box of revolver ammunition and handed her 6 rounds before backing up out of the way. Beatrid loaded the rounds quickly, almost dropping one. Then she turned to the dummy, aimed down the barrel and pulled the trigger. There was a muffled bang and a cloud of smoke, but the burly blacksmith didn't stop. She pulled the trigger again and again in rapid succession until she'd emptied all 6 bullets into the dummy. It was only 30 feet away, and she didn't miss a single shot. There was a moment of silence, then Dalo waved his own hand, dispelling the smoke. The dummy shot across the room, coming to rest before the audience. One bullet had made a mess of its head, while the rest had impacted the center mass and turned it into a cratered ruin of kindling. Nathan was surprised the bullets hadn't penetrated all the way through the wooden dummy. Stainel spoke up quietly. That's Everoak, isn't it? At Dalo's answering nod, the weapon master looked impressed. Can I see the weapon? He held out his hand, but Beatrid shook her head jerkily. We're not done. Then she pulled out the rifle, and Stainel's gaze intensified as she loaded a single round. Cullel summoned another dummy while Beatrid aimed down the length of the long gun. She leaned forward into the recoil as she fired, but still staggered slightly at the sharp crack of the big cartridge. The dummy's head exploded. The bullet ricocheted off the angled plane of force and left behind a crack in the spell. It bounced a few more times before burying itself in the solid railing that separated the arena from the viewing area. Nathan winced. He was glad that ricochet hadn't hit anybody. Stainel's jaw dropped and he breathed out a single word: extraordinary. Stainel was staring in rapt fascination at the rifle in Beatrid's hands. Then he turned to address Kia. Good bet. He pulled out a wide, flat disc about 9 inches across and flicked it towards the tall woman. She snapped out a gauntleted hand to catch the disc with a snort. The tall woman turned to display the object to Nathan. The surface of the disc was intricately enchanted, with a large gem glowing white in the middle. 7 crystals were spaced along the outside edge, each glowing a different color. She explained briefly before tucking it away. It's a recharge disc, A Kali's Conclave item that can recharge near any enchantment. Nathan blinked. Did you bet that Stanel wouldn't know the weapon? Kia nodded. Yes. You have the sharpness of a good blade. I did not think you would be wrong with this. Nathan turned to Stanel. You gave me the money for this project. You didn't think I could do it. Stanel had a slight grin on his face. I figured you'd come up with something useful to Sarah and that a gift from a friend weighed differently than a gift from a father. Besides, I thought I might be wrong, and I was. He gestured to the rifle, then stepped towards the arena with his hand outstretched. How does it work? He asked Beatrid. The copper-skinned man's advance was blocked by a hand like a gnarled branch. Herden stood in his way. Now that you're all lit and flaring, it's time for me to dump some water on the fire. These weapons have some true insights behind them. We'll tell you the basics of how they work, but not the details. And I'll imprint the weapons to your daughter here, with a curse activating if anybody else wields them or tries to take them apart. Sarah had also stood and was stepping towards Beatrid. Yeah, Dad. These weapons are for me, not for you. Thank you, Herden, Nathan, Beatrid, Poppy. I look forward to holding them in my own hands. She brushed past her father, who was looking forlorn. His hands made little grasp-wide gestures at his side. Herden's stern expression cracked into a broad smile at Stanel's expression. We can do the imprinting later, after you get the chance to weigh them in your own hands. Then you can order some of your own. We've already agreed to make you some if you want them. For now, let your daughter try out her new toy. Cullo frowned as she inspected first the bullet embedded in the railing, then the crack in the force wall. She dismissed the force wall and sat for a moment before turning to Stella. Stella, can you figure out an appropriate backstop that won't send pieces of metal flying back at us? Stella looked a little blindsided. Nathan was sitting in between Stella and her mom. He turned so the foxfolk could only see the back of his head and mouthed a word at Stella. Dirt. Stella caught his silent motion and narrowed her eyes in thought. Then she snapped her fingers and spent 10 seconds working through a spell before casting. A mound of conjured earth appeared on the other end of the arena. It only covered about a quarter of the back wall. Dalo seemed to think it was a good idea, and with a wave of his hand, more conjured dirt showered down to cover the entire back wall. Beatrid had been explaining the operation and terminology of the revolvers to Sarah. She showed her how the mechanism worked and gestured at the cartridge, and the enchanted hammer on the back of the gun. She loaded one revolver and had Sarah load the other one, before showing her the speed loaders and demonstrating their use. Beatrid had Sarah keep the guns pointed downrange at all times with her finger off the trigger, which reminded Nathan of something. I just realized we never built a safety onto those things. At least Beatrid's got the rudiments of gun safety and trigger discipline already figured out. Sarah was extremely focused on the instruction, not missing a single detail as Beatrid explained with occasional interjections from Poppy. After just a few minutes, Sarah was smoothly handling the revolvers as if she'd been using them for years. She loaded and unloaded the cylinders, then aimed and mimed firing with an empty chamber. She examined the box of bullets to see how many rounds she could afford to play with. Then she carefully loaded each revolver and took one in each hand. She stood in the center of the room. Cullo conjured some small targets, some of which bobbed back and forth. They looked like small, colored force blocks, but almost insubstantial. Sarah took a deep breath and raised one revolver. Her first shot cracked apart a stationary target, and she paused to assess the shot, frowning over the feeling of recoil. She raised the gun again and fired quickly, hitting a target with every bullet. As soon as the gun in one hand was empty, she raised the other hand and resumed firing, quickly tearing her way through the targets. I guess that answers the question. Her class and skills definitely apply to guns. She'd holstered the first revolver while firing the second. As soon as the second gun ran dry, she flipped out the cylinder and shook out the empty casings. Her other hand came up and tried to slap a speed loader home, but she fumbled it and sent the rounds falling to the ground. Nathan winced, hoping none of them went off. None did, right. No primers. You need to stick something thin and hot through the paper to set them off, and basically only the enchanted hammer fits the bill. That probably makes them a lot less likely to discharge accidentally. Dallo repeated his trick to get rid of the smoke, and Sarah stuck the guns into her pouches, beaming. She turned to Nathan and bowed deeply. "This is a true gift, Nathan Lark. I will treasure this day until the ending." Nathan didn't know how to respond and just nodded back with a broad smile on his face. Everybody else seemed thrilled with the display. Nothing else would suffice but for Sarah to try out the rifle. Nathan explained that it was meant for longer distances. Beatrice chipped in that she hadn't been able to properly calibrate the sights in her workshop, since she hadn't wanted to go into Old Gemor to properly test the range. She showed Sarah how the front sight was actually clamped onto the barrel and could be moved around slightly to properly calibrate it. Zeroing. Whatever. But Sarah didn't seem worried. She had skills that enhanced accuracy and power of ranged weapons in general, and they seemed to apply to guns too. She squeezed off a few shots, getting the feel for the recoil. Nathan advised her to pull the trigger smoothly, not jerk it and throw off her aim. Eventually, Stanel got his turn. He took a revolver in each hand and sighed, closing his eyes as he simply held them. "Oh yes, this is a good weapon. I think I will want several of these. They're so quick, I don't even need to draw my arm back. Just track from target to target." The weapon master swept the guns across imaginary targets in a complex pattern. "I wonder if, well, time will tell how compatible these are with my skills." Then he picked up the rifle, repeating the process where he closed his eyes. "Indeed, truly a weapon worthy of a quester. This rifle might make me put down my Edrani sharpshot bow." He hesitated. "For some things." He cracked his eyelids open and looked to Herden. "I see some enchanted rounds over there. May I ask?" Herden smirked, the expression looking very natural on the crotchety old woman. "Indeed. I could guess that you would ask for enchanted ammunition. You'll like them, explosive and penetrating. The explosive should only explode inside the target, and I think the penetrating rifle round would go through a siege bore the long way, before skills are applied." Stanel rubbed his hands together. "I'll be dropping by the shop tomorrow. Should I come to Beatrice's place?" At her encouraging nod, he looked down at the weapons. "And I think I'll place an order of more ammunition for these weapons for Sarah." Finally, his attention turned to Nathan. "And Nathan, I think Sarah and I owe you a favor for this, for the gift of a new and powerful weapon to my daughter, and for teaching the crafters of Gemor a new type of weapon, however restricted it must be." Nathan nodded, looking to Kia. His implication was obvious. She tilted her head from side to side, then spoke. "Stanel and I will speak of this later." "I am inclined to agree, but I recall you mentioned another possibility." She gestured toward Stella with a questioning look. Stella looked flustered. I don't know yet. It's helpful, but we aren't done yet." Kia made a thoughtful noise. "Then we will speak more after the graduation ceremony when you are done. I have not shared my airwalking insight with any, and I would wait for the adventurer's oath." After that, there were a few more things to take care of, mostly involving Herden. She imprinted the weapons to Sarah, warning everybody not to touch them. It would take a good bit of handling to set off the self-destruct, but better not to risk it. Additionally, Herden looked over the swords that Nathan had broken the curse on. She was surprised by whatever she saw and called over Dallo and Cullel to take a look as well. After looking over the sword, Dallo shot Nathan a gauging look. Arl hovered nearby, clearly anxious for the verdict. While Herden, Dallo, and Cullel conversed over the swords, Nathan looked around for the other members of the heirs. Sarah was talking to Poppy, but Stella and Katja came over. They chatted about the new weapons. Katja schemed about having a truly long-range option for the team and wondered if they could force most foes into attacking them. Stella seemed relaxed and pleased, glad that her friends were upgrading their firepower. Then Herden came forth, holding the swords. The primary enchantment on these swords are still intact. It's an impressively simple but powerful mana channeling enchantment. The basic strengthening enchantments on the blades are also still active. Most of the grip-specific enchantments are dead, but they were stupid ones anyway. What kind of fool needs to burn mana to hold onto their sword, or keep their hands dry? Herden shook her head, seemingly disappointed in the sweaty-palmed, long-dead magelord. She returned back to task. The swords are ready to use and the craftsmanship is acceptable, especially for Sklian blades. The materials are excellent, and the edge itself is made of mana-forged mithril for the enchantment to work through. I would almost recommend breaking them down for component parts to get a new pair of swords made, but this channeling enchantment is surprisingly versatile. She paused, offering the swords to Arl. However, you should choose what kind of mana you want imbued. They don't come with a self-recharge, so you will need them manually recharged by a mage with the appropriate mana types. Arl took the blades, and Herden gestured towards Stella. The channeling enchantment is best with non-elemental mana, though less substantial elements like fire or air would work. I would not recommend water, earth, wood, or life. I think air mana would just send a gust of wind with every swing, pushing everything away from the blade. Fire would heat the blade and burn all it touches, but would do little for its penetrative power. Shadow would mimic the original death mana, but would be better for destroying armor and worse at disintegrating flesh. Stella frowned at the swords that Arl was busy examining. What about force, or lightning, or light? Herden looked surprised at Stella's question. You are young to have all those powerful mana types. Then she shrugged. But it is not my role to question your secrets. Force would be good. It would extend the weapon with a blade of force which would cut like a high-tier force spell. The sword itself would become nearly impossible to break. Lightning would give a strong shock and blast back any target the blade touched. The effect would be strong, as all lightning spells are, but it would drain the mana storage of the blade quickly. The mana storage is expansive, and as long as it could be recharged frequently, that might be very effective. The old woman paused and frowned. As for light, I have not worked with many light enchantments. It would likely let off a blinding burst of light with every strike and might duplicate some of the burning effects of a fire imbuement. I am not sure. At that, Cullo got everybody's attention with a quiet but very clear flashing chime. This has been very exciting, but we are late for dinner. Let us go eat. The rest of the dinner was a lot of fun. Nathan enjoyed hanging out with the Guardians. They were self-confident and cool, and the mood was celebratory. Nathan got toasted a few times, along with Beatrice and the other crafters. Stanel seemed in a grand mood, mentioning multiple times that he expected Sarah and Arl to start making their names now that they had worthy weapons. Sarah made a joke about potentially angling her level 81 class development to focus on guns. It was the kind of joke that tested the waters, probing for a response. Stanel looked thoughtful but didn't shoot down the idea. Interesting. Chapter 65, a frustrating field before too long. The heirs were on their way back to the Adventurers Guild. The new weapons were all stowed away in Sarah and Arl's dimensional pouches, and they strolled down the hill chatting and being cheerful. There hadn't been any alcohol, so Nathan was completely sober. They arrived back at their suite of rooms in a celebratory mood, with Arl especially not wanting to sit down and relax. He pulled out the twin swords again, examining their shining curves in the main room while the rest of the heirs lounged on the various couches. Sarah asked the obvious question. What mana types are you thinking of having imbued? Arl looked up from the swords and turned towards Stella. It seems best to have mana types that could be recharged by Stella. I realize I am assuming your willingness to help me. Stella blew a raspberry and waved her hand at him. Truly the most difficult task. Her expression sobered. I would agree to charge your weapons for as long as we are on the same team. Arl nodded back seriously. In that case, I believe force would be an obvious choice. An unbreakable blade that extends the size of the sword and cuts with such a fine edge would be powerful. He looked down again, considering the swords in his hands. But I don't believe that I should do that to both swords. I should limit myself to mana types you have available, so that recharging is easier. Fire seems a lesser choice but better than air. Herden made it sound like air would be actively harmful to the weapon unless we're worried about poison gas. Earth mana does not seem like an option. I find myself hoping that your insight of lightning is going well. Arl grinned expectantly at Nathan and Stella. Stella rolled her head around, flipping her braid over her shoulder. Fine, fine, let's get on with it. Nathan, it's time to teach me of lightning, again. Hear me, but I am feeling like this insight is forever around the next corner. Nathan nodded agreeably and cracked his neck as he sat down next to Stella. He spoke to the other heirs. Fair enough. We're close, might get to it as soon as tomorrow. This probably won't be too interesting to y'all, so you might want to find something else to do. He focused the lesson on electricity and magnetism. They had already gone through some practical exercises with the generator, and Stella understood that things were more complicated than they seemed. She'd messed around with magnets and charge enough to accept that there were invisible, hidden forces moving things around, and it was up to Nathan to explain what those forces were. He needed to connect the math he'd been teaching Stella to the evidence before her eyes. He'd been taught to do a full derivation of all of Maxwell's laws, and he wanted to instill at least a bit of the logic of those processes into Stella, if not necessarily walk through every aspect of the math. But math was just a language for describing the world precisely, and Nathan was going to take it as far as he could. His lecturing was certainly helping out. Concepts were easier to explain than they should have been, and Stella was likely to interpret Nathan correctly when he made things ambiguous. Honestly, Nathan wasn't sure how much of that was his skill and how much of it was Stella being smart. Regardless, Nathan wanted to start with describing how electric and magnetic fields were generated. Over the evening, Nathan walked Stella through the first two of Maxwell's laws, which governed how electric charges created electric fields and magnetic dipoles produced magnetic fields. Nathan was glad to revisit the ideas and go through the math behind them. He'd always found it elegant that under Gauss' law, static electric fields were created by imbalances of charge, while the law for magnetism basically meant that there were no imbalances of magnetic sources and sinks. If you broke a magnet in half between the two poles, you created new poles at either side of the break point. The math was almost supplementary to helping Stella create the right kind of field simulation with her magic. They went out to the practice field, where Stella placed a few glowing orbs in the air to illuminate the darkened area. Nathan was sure to close and latch the gate before they moved to the far side of the practice area, under the 70-foot drop that Nathan felt so well acquainted with. Then Nathan helped Stella understand how a charge moved in the presence of electric and magnetic fields. He used his spear to write out the equations in the sand. He had Stella conjure up some simulated fields and traced how a charge would spiral around magnetic field lines via the right-hand rule. Electric field flow was a bit easier, since a charge would follow electric field lines towards an opposite charge, or away from a similar charge. Part of the trick was to explain how most fields were not simple. In the real world, multiple contiguous sources tended to complicate things enough that applying the math was hard. This is really so much easier to explain with a three-dimensional model. I'm jealous. I had to learn by drawing X's and bullseyes on paper. Low-tier lecturing 10 achieved. Yay. They left off there for the evening, though Stella wanted to keep going. She was starting to see the elegance of the way electricity and magnetism worked together, orthogonal yet complementary to each other, and she was hungry to complete the puzzle. Oh, I can't wait until I get through Ampere's law and Faraday's law and show her that light is a combined electromagnetic wave. That realization is mind-blowing. But it was getting late, and Nathan reminded Stella that they still had time. After all, he wasn't planning on running off into the wilderness anytime soon. He'd prefer to come back to this tomorrow when they were fresh. She looked frustrated but acceded to his request. The next morning Stella was anxious. They did their exercises and she managed to keep her peace, though she kept shooting Nathan impatient looks. She kept silent over breakfast, sullenly glaring at the other teams around them. Finally, as they were leaving class, she asked Nathan if he'd skip class to teach her math. Okay, that's just hilarious. I've skipped class for other things, but never to do math. Well, I think I was late to class a few times because I was busy doing math, but that's different. The rest of the heirs teased her about it and Stella just pouted and murmured, but I want to learn about lightning. Nathan raised his hand respectfully. That's a pretty great argument. Still, after lunch, we have time. Nathan was glad they hadn't skipped class. They were learning more about Giant's Rest and what forces they would deploy on the field. The military might of Giant's Rest was primarily in its mages, who had an almost feudal-like structure, with the archmages of the Ascendant Academy standing at the peak. Then there were various tiers of researchers, lecturers, and proctors beneath them, owing their loyalty and education to their high-ranking sponsors. The pattern continued on down to the lowest of students, who typically were the children of existing mages. It was common for male mages to have a lot of kids in Giant's Rest, which sure didn't diminish his hatred of the place. The more Nathan heard about the Ascendant Academy, the more he felt it exemplified the worst excesses of academia back on Earth. People fought tooth and nail to climb the pile. Once they were atop it, they had ultimate authority over those below them, bordered only by others of the same authority. It seemed a life of polite violence, with brutal politics that could get you demoted, killed, or mind-controlled at any misstep. You trod on those below to ascend, wary of being backstabbed by those at your side or squashed by those above. Apparently the enslavement mages were considered lesser mages, since they needed to leave the academy to pursue riches or recognition. The highest calling for a Giant's Rest mage was to ascend an archmage, rich with magic and wealth. The best way to do this was by demonstrating magical genius with your learning and original projects, leveling from displays of magical might. That would let you catch the eye of somebody above you, who would count on your support once you rose in power. And that was because Giant's Rest fought duels, just like Gemor. Many of their duels weren't dangerous, focusing more on judging magical power and control with only reputation on the line. Of course, when a low reputation could result in somebody dominating you with no consequences, their duels were hardly without stakes. What a damn snake pit, and it's all based on magical might. Nathan found the discussion of the structure of the Ascendant Academy helpful to understanding his enemy. However, this lesson was focused on what made up the military might of Giant's Rest. Almost every Giant's Rest mage would know mage armor, and most of them had force mana as well. In contrast to Gemor's style of force mana, Giant's Rest force constructs tended to be invisible, but smaller and somewhat harder to pierce. Most Giant's Rest mages could cast basic mental spells like paralysis and daze, with spells after that depending on the specific build and mana types of the mage in question. Enslavement mages with mass daze or dominate were fairly common in Giant's Rest forces, and they tended to have several spells focused on controlling enemies and preventing them getting close enough to attack. Aside from mages, Giant's Rest didn't have much of a formal army. They had no standing forces, not even of slave soldiers. Instead, it was all just the personal possessions of various archmages and the mages below them. The relevant possessions being slave soldiers and golems. Golems were expensive and usually required one or more people to be sacrificed to empower the golem core with motive force. But they were strong, hard to kill, and their bodies could be further enchanted. Excellent guards, but their lack of flexibility and mobility in rough terrain tended to be a problem in the guerrilla wars that Gemor liked to fight. Kill the person directing the golems, and they would revert to the simplest of orders. The slave soldiers were mostly uniform. They weren't supposed to win fights against high-level Gemor adventurers. They were supposed to prevent anybody from running up to the Giant's Rest mages while they were casting battle-winning spells. They tended to be drawn from lower-performing servants or artisans who were considered expendable. That meant they didn't tend to have specialized martial classes. Slave soldiers were usually armed with a big shield and a spear. But the mental spells used to control them were brutal and left fairly little in the way of autonomous thought. A slave soldier wouldn't break until the mage commanding them was dead, and the fight was obviously lost, at which point they would lie down and die. I know enough military history to know that being unbreakable is incredibly important to large-scale conflicts. Morale is to the physical as 3 is to 1, and all that. No wonder Gemor doesn't fight Giant's Rest in the open. Giant's Rest did have specialized slave soldiers. Different mages had their personal forces trained in different ways according to their whims. Some archmages had cadres of specialized archers, assassins, heavily armored linebreakers, and more. They were trained from birth, guided towards specific classes, and could be terrifyingly potent. I think those guys are going to be my biggest weakness. I probably stand a good chance against an archmage in a confined area right now, if they don't already know to use non-conjured elemental magic against me. And I'm only going to get stronger. But one of those elite slave soldiers could probably take me apart. Something to watch out for. Finally, there were the slave masters. These formed what middle class there was in Giant's Rest, and were the middle management and overseers for when more initiative was required, but a full mage wasn't justified. The overseers weren't often seen in combat situations except for slave raids, where their specialized classes helped get new captures organized and moving quickly. I don't think I'll have a problem with killing them either. After the lesson, Nathan had to spend a few minutes controlling his anger. It had been an enlightening lesson, but it had reminded Nathan of what was going on across the mountains while he lazed around in Gemor. Over lunch, Stella encouraged everybody to eat quickly so they could get to the practice fields as soon as possible. Arl and Sarah went back for seconds, then thirds that they didn't really eat while Stella glared. They still left the dining hall earlier than most and beelined for the private training area. There, Nathan finally turned to the derivations and logic behind Ampere's law and Faraday's law. From seeing the generator, Stella had accepted that a moving magnetic field could move a charge to make current, but unifying all of it and describing the surface integral so that she got it was taking a little while. It was the nice part of tutoring somebody one-on-one. You could ask questions Socratically and be sure they understood everything, and weren't just nodding along to get to the next part of the lesson. Meanwhile, the rest of the heirs were doing various kinds of weapons practice or running drills. Sarah had made some dummy cartridges from spent casings and was practicing rapidly reloading the revolvers, as well as incorporating them into her usual cycling of weapons. The more she practiced, the more Nathan saw that the revolvers were quickly becoming a weapon of choice, even if she wasn't live firing them very often. Nathan knew Stainel planned to take Sarah out into Old Gemor with Beatrice later to practice privately, and at longer ranges with both types of firearms. Katja was working on quickly summoning divine mana to enhance his shield and hammer without requiring a lengthy prayer. He had gotten much quicker with the shield, but was having trouble imbuing the divine power into his hammer as rapidly. Arl was going through sword drills with the new sabers, getting an exact feel for their weight, and also working out the best ways to draw them from his pouch and trigger the enchantments nearly instantaneously. They weren't empowered yet, but it didn't stop Arl from practicing. Finally, Nathan was satisfied that Stella had understood Faraday's law and why changing magnetic flux caused a voltage over a wire. Then it was time for the heirs to break and go to individual tutoring. Stella walked toward her parents but looked back at Nathan with a twinkle in her eye. "I'll be right back." She exchanged a few quick words with them, pointing back at him. Dalo looked like he was about to argue, but Cullo raised her hands placatingly. Then Stella stormed back towards Nathan while Dalo shot him an admonishing look. The short, red-haired mage waved to her parents without looking back, dismissing them. She gestured back to the practice area. "Let's keep going. I want to figure this out today." Chapter 66, very frightening. Nathan looked over at Stella's parents. Dalo had a peeved expression on his face while Cullo merely appeared curious. Dalo almost started striding in their direction before Cullo grabbed his sleeve and pulled him back. They had a short conversation before taking to the air and flying back to their home. "Doesn't seem like my place to get involved with family discussions. If Stella wants to keep learning about electricity and magnetism instead of her parents' magic tutoring, I'm not gonna say no. We'll deal with it if it becomes an issue." They moved back to the practice field, and Nathan launched into the topic of Ampere's law, which described how a moving charge created a rotating magnetic field. He didn't go into special relativity and the concept of reference frames, but was able to communicate the idea well enough. It felt like lecturing was pushing at its boundaries, ready to develop but awaiting an appropriate insight. It was only low tier, so it made sense that it would be easier to develop. Stella examined the latest set of equations as she played with her floating sand simulation of a moving charge. She looked back up at Nathan. "Okay, I think I understand these forces. Now, how do I use them to make lightning? And what about light? Is that going to require a whole new set of mathematical equations? I'm still interested, but..." Nathan was lost for words for a few seconds. He'd kind of forgotten the ultimate goal of all of this, allowing Stella to generate new types of mana without having to take up a class skill. He scratched the back of his head. "Well, it's not too much farther to get to light, actually. Though we'll be missing some of the details." Stella shook her head. "I can think of so many amazing things I can do with lightning now that I understand how it works. But how do I get there? I need to manipulate charge with magic, but what's the first step? I don't just want to understand it, I want to use it." She was starting to get frustrated, which was fair. She just spent a ton of time learning several college classes worth of math and physics, all with the promise that it would let her shoot lightning. And now the last leap was the final stumbling block. Nathan thought for a moment. Natural sources of lightning. Well, there's the obvious one. And Stella has air mana. Not water mana, but static is all about friction between insulators anyway. Nathan grinned, then turned to Stella. "Okay, so static electricity is what makes lightning. Static shocks are imbalances of charge that are generated by rubbing things that don't conduct electricity against one another. For normal lightning, it's usually about collisions between water, but static can happen when air rubs against itself too. I want you to try using air mana to make a bunch of woven bands of air, which are rubbing against each other. Have two different flows, each moving in a different direction and converging on different points. Maybe make the flows with two different gas compositions if you can." Stella frowned at his description, especially when he mentioned making the streams of air have different compositions. She sighed and threw up her hands. "Why not? Let's try it out." She gestured for Nathan to step back. The mage spent a few minutes fiddling with empty air, concentrating intently on something invisible to Nathan. Then she banished the attempted spell with a frustrated gesture. "No, that doesn't work. How about this?" She fiddled with the spell some more. Nathan would have loved to help, but he didn't understand how to make a spell all that well, so he trusted that Stella could figure it out. The mage turned back to Nathan, digging her fingers into her auburn hair in frustration. "That doesn't work either. It feels like cheating if all I needed to do was rub some air together and not learn all of that dumb math." Then she paused. "I wonder, force spells can block lightning, but they start acting strange afterwards. I wonder if they build up charge." She turned and jogged back to their suite, Nathan following along behind the agitated mage. The sun was setting and people were heading to dinner, but Stella ignored them and went into the main room, where she pulled out the generator and gestured for Nathan to spin it. He obliged, putting his back into it. He didn't know what Stella was planning, but he was going to let her apply the knowledge she'd learned. Soon enough there was a faint sparking between the generator wires. Stella stuck her finger into the gap, her face intent. The sparks had to sting, but she left her hand there for a minute. She withdrew her hand and conjured a small pane of force between the two wires. "Keep turning it. I want to see." She left the force block there for 20 seconds, then reached her hand back into the device. There was a much larger pop this time as Stella's hand approached the pane of force. She jumped and shook out her hand. I think the force pane acted a bit like a capacitor, storing a charge. Wild. She examined the construct before dismissing the force pane and making a more complicated force construct with two panes that joined together in a narrow spike. The spike was aimed at her, and Nathan frowned at the force construct. But she hadn't told him to stop, so Nathan kept spinning the generator. After a moment, faint sparks started to bounce around at the point of the force spike. Stella grabbed a spare magnet in one hand and closed her other hand around the point, hiding the sparks. She moved the hand holding the magnet to be next to the hand covering the sparking spike. "I understand that this is just a moving charge, a current. I know how it's made, by a moving magnetic field. I can guide it with my magic." Her hair started to stand up. It was still tied in a tight braid, but strands escaped and fluttered around her head. Stella extended the hand holding the magnet away from her and pointed her finger out. Faint tendrils of electricity started jumping from her finger, as if it was a Van de Graaff generator. She started chuckling, ramping up into a full-blown cackle as the tendrils grew stronger, and the distinctive crackling of electricity discharge ramped up. "And if I wrap it with a spinning field from the magnet, I can guide it." The manifold tendrils narrowed down to a cone, then to a line of crackling electricity extending a foot away from her hand. The door opened and Kachai walked into the room, turning to ask about the crackling noise in the room. He nearly walked into the faint line of electricity which reached out towards his armor. He fell over on his ass as Stella, still laughing, discontinued the spell with a flourish. She stood there for a moment, cackling and raising both hands in triumph. Her hands twitched involuntarily and looked faintly burned. She turned to Nathan and gave him a hug, magic robes be damned. Nathan hugged back and was rewarded with a static shock for his trouble. It almost interrupted his attempt to hold back his antimagic as Stella's still staticky hair climbed up his nose. She pushed away, beaming ear to ear. "I have 2 new mana types now. One for electricity, another for magnetism. I've never heard of that one before, so I doubt there are many existing spells for it, but that just means I get to invent them." She spun, full of excitement, and hugged Koch as he climbed to his feet. He looked down at Stella and gently patted her on the shoulder. He turned his attention back to Nathan. "That seems to have gone well." Nathan nodded, also smiling. "I think Stella might need some healing though. Please make it thorough." She blinked, looking down at her hands. "Oh, ow, yes please." Kacha sighed, shaking his head as he bent over Stella's hands, muttering a long prayer to heal the electrical burns. "Those can be scary as hell. Getting zapped can leave you with mild skin burns but lethal internal burns." He urged Kachai to keep going, and he obliged, sweeping Stella with multiple passes of his healing magic. Stella was having trouble staying still, prancing around the room with excitement. Electricity and magnetism. Dragon's breath, that's exciting. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Nathan couldn't help but prompt her. Congratulations, you understand one of the 4 fundamental forces of reality, and there's one more part to it. Light, remember, she turned back a bit flushed. One of the 4, don't you think we've done enough for one evening? She stopped talking, mouth still slightly open. What am I saying? Teach me of light, O master of the mountain. Nathan grabbed a slate, making a quick sketch. Once you understood Maxwell's equations, it was easy to make the jump to generalized electromagnetic waves. You could figure it out yourself if you just thought about it, and all Nathan needed to do was guide Stella in the right direction. This is simple. Say you have an independent magnetic field without a source. Don't worry about how it started. It just goes from nothing to this vector, then dies out again. Nathan looked up, judging Stella's reaction. She was calming down but looking doubtfully at the slate. But it can't come from nothing. Bear with me. Once it goes away, since there's nothing causing it, it's a changing magnetic field. So what does that make? He prompted her by gesturing with the chalk. An electric field. Right, which would be in this direction, perpendicular to the original magnetic field if slightly offset. But then you have an electric field with no source, so that goes away. And that makes... Stella was looking at the slate with some concentration. Nathan could tell she was connecting the dots. That makes a magnetic field without a source, just like what you started with, but farther along. She looked up at Nathan. And that's light, just alternating electric and magnetic fields. It would just keep going until it ran into something. It's not a physical thing, just a perpetuating alternating field traveling perpendicular to the field directions. Just a force. Nathan smiled. All it had taken was a little push. Congratulations, you have developed the low-tier lecturing utility skill into mid-tier lecturing. Utility skill, mid-tier lecturing. This skill will help you explain concepts in the future, smoothing over gaps and aiding greatly in explanation and understanding. Will not help you convey details you do not know, and will not help you suppress people's doubts about what you are teaching. Nathan commented on her statement. Effectively right. Light is electromagnetic waves, and more than that. You can't separate out the 2 fields in light, and they don't really have a directionality in quite the way that it seems. They're also quantized because it's like a packet of waveforms moving along. I can explain some of that with math, but it gets even more complicated. Stella barely heard him. She was looking off into the middle distance, her jaw hanging open. Wait, that's too big. She sat there, mumbling for a moment. Kachai squinted at them like they were speaking a different language. Which they essentially were. Yeah, the language of math built to describe physical reality. Stella sat down heavily on the couch. It seemed like the idea Nathan had given her was too big for her to process all at once, and I didn't even go over the full thing. You kind of need special relativity and frames of reference to properly understand it. Maybe later. Kachai spoke up, looking concerned. Stella, is there a problem? She looked up at him, her gaze unfocused. Then she raised a hand in the air, and it flashed with sparks and a flickering light. The sparks were unfocused and jumped back to Stella's own hand. She twitched and pulled her hand back as it was shocked, her hair rising into the air once more. A scabbarded knife on the table next to her had jerked, and Nathan could feel the magnetism mana from here. It felt like warm wires dragging over his skin. He guessed she just poured a bunch of electric and magnetic mana together, trying to make light in the way that Nathan had explained. Mid-tier Identify 5 achieved. Kachai looked even more worried. Stella, this is the wrong time to experiment with even more new mana types. Look at me. He stepped closer, wary of the way her braid had started rising on its own. He shot a desperate look to Nathan, who took the hint. Nathan stepped forward, burrowing through the aura of charged mana. He grabbed onto Stella's hand as it reached upwards once again. "Stella, hold on, don't go too quickly. Lightning is dangerous, don't try to make up spells with it on the fly. That's how you kill yourself. You know better than this." A jolt of mana came out of her hand again, both lightning and magnetism. Nathan absorbed it smoothly, examining the magnetic mana for the second time. Stella's spell was unfocused, as if she jammed the two mana types together and hoped they fit. Mid-tier spell sense 8 achieved. He leaned down and yelled in her ear. "Stella!" She shook her head, then her eyes focused on Nathan's just a foot in front of her face. They locked eyes for a moment, and Nathan saw lightning crackling in a spiraling pattern inside her pupils. Stella sucked in a breath and looked away. "Sorry, I wanted to try it. I think I need to go talk to my parents. They need to know about this." Nathan nodded, then pulled her up. "Do you mean to teach them the insight?" Stella wobbled as she rose, her motions jerky. She snorted disdainfully. "No, I don't know if I can. There's so much that they would need to understand, and they both have lightning already. They think of it completely differently. It's not just another element like fire. It's a fundamental force, not a thing, a field." Maybe now's not the time to explain combustion. Nathan looked to Kachai. "Should we walk her up there?" The wolfman stroked his chin. "I am glad that this lesson seems to have gone well, but it seems that what Stella needs is advice from her parents on handling powerful insights." With that, they escorted their insight-befuddled teammate up the roads of Gemor to her parents' mansion. She quickly regained her motor control and was soon skipping up the mountain. Nathan made sure to mention to Cullel that Stella hadn't eaten when they dropped her off. Stella did not return that night, and Nathan had to explain to Arl and Sarah that he might have taught her an insight that was slightly too big for her. Nathan meditated before bed, as was his usual practice. He was apprehensive about the consequences of what he'd just done. He hoped it didn't end up being a problem for Stella's development as a mage. But with this out of the way, everything should be smooth sailing until graduation on the solstice. Stella did return the next morning as they were gearing up for calisthenics. A sleepy-looking Dalo descended from the sky with Stella in tow. He dropped her off, fixing Nathan with a complicated look. Then he broke eye contact and sighed without saying anything. The elderly mage flew away as they started running. Stella seemed happy and refreshed. She took off immediately, taunting the rest of them to keep up. Kachai looked at Nathan and shrugged before they all followed along. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com, Chapter 67. The building charge. Nathan felt more at ease over the next few days. He'd accomplished his goals at empowering the heirs. They were deadlier than ever, and Nathan felt like his own increasing power wouldn't end up eclipsing theirs anytime soon. If anything, he was the one falling behind. He looked up from stretching one evening as Sarah returned from the tutoring. It was late out, and Nathan could guess why. "Go outside the city with your dad again," she nodded, looking satisfied. "Pistol practice in the Caxal's basement, then long-range shooting outside the city. I can kill a stalker with one rifle shot from half a mile off. I'm glad it's going well. I was worried that they would be too different from the weapons you grew up practicing with." Nathan got up from the ground, pleased with his flexibility. "Stanel trained us to use every weapon just like he does. But even he recognizes that the guns are something special." Sarah hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I dropped a skill called straight flight earlier. It would help my weapons fly straight through difficult winds, but that seems less of an issue with guns. I picked up one called gunslinging instead. It improves the speed for drawing and reloading." Nathan's eyebrows raised. "Can you show me?" In a flash, both of Sarah's pistols were in her hands, aimed at a couch to Nathan's right. "No need to draw back my arm or load an arrow, just aim and fire." She gave Nathan a grin. "These are indeed weapons worthy of a quester." At that moment, Stella staggered through the door, collapsing on the couch that Sarah was aiming at. Sarah holstered her weapons, taking in the exhausted mage. Practicing new mana types with your parents. Did you need a prophecy to learn that? Stella's sarcastic response was muted by a yawn, but she also looked happy. They don't want to teach me many lightning spells. They're costly on mana and very dangerous, but that's the entire point. And they know they can't stop me now that I have the mana types. What about magnetic mana? Do they know any spells for that? Stella waved a hand dismissively at Nathan's questions. Number Dallo did mutter about some Kali's conclave spell references, but it seems rarer than a dragon's egg. Her tired face morphed into a satisfied grin. But it's great for guiding lightning. The most complicated part of lightning spells is guiding the mana, and magnetic mana is excellent at it. I'm building my own lightning spells, replacing the guidance mechanisms with magnetic constructs. We'll practice with it tomorrow, Nathan asked. Stella nodded. After I sleep. The next day, Nathan got to know the humming crackle of lightning mana even better. It was a great way to efficiently recharge his stamina, given the cost and speed of lightning mana. Stella's growing prowess at targeting meant she could nail him from across the battlefield with a lightning bolt to completely fill his stamina. Even when Nathan tried to dodge the bolts to give her better practice, he mostly failed. The spell was nearly instantaneous, and Stella's aim was good. They emerged from the practice yard to a number of awed and jealous looks thrown Stella's way by the other adventurer mages. After all, it was hard to hide that you were throwing around lightning bolts in the practice yard. Only a handful of mages in all of Gemor could use lightning mana, and most of them were over level 243, since they'd gained the mana type from a class development. Over the next few days, Nathan helped Stella experiment with magnetic mana-only spells, holding up magnets or chunks of metal for her to throw around. After a lot of failure, she got frustrated. The mana's too slippery on its own. I can create spiraling constructs to guide lightning, but a simple flow to throw metal isn't working. Picking up the spray of metal pieces, Nathan nodded silently. He didn't have much to add. This wasn't something he had a lot of expertise with. After a bit more practice, he broached a topic they dropped earlier. Are you interested in trying to get light mana again? No. Stella answered quickly, eyes downcast. My parents made me promise not to. They said they'd help me with it after graduation, but my dad said it was an undead-brained move to learn another mana type before then. Later in the week, Nathan did more sparring with Arl. He was working with sabers more now, getting familiar with the blades now that his new swords were charged. Stella had charged one with lightning and the other with force mana earlier, and they were potent weapons. He demolished a score of even the toughest training dummies, and was forced to spar with Nathan, who could resist even that level of magical firepower. The force blade extended far enough to rival the reach of his favored greatsword, and the projected edge could take chunks out of mundane steel, though they broke on Nathan's arms. Meanwhile, the lightning blade struck like a thunderbolt with each blow, zapping the target with electricity while letting loose a directional detonation of concussive force. Even though Nathan could absorb most of the attack, the concussion was enough to send him skidding back with every blow. So much power was released with each hit that the sword only lasted for a dozen blows before Stella had to recharge it. But Arl could deliver those dozen blows in half as many seconds. It was an impressive display of rapidly delivered firepower capable of taking down the toughest enemies. The last member of the heirs hadn't been slacking either. Nathan regularly sparred with Koch as the cleric worked on incorporating divine magic into his fighting style more and more. Again, Nathan shrugged, once again setting himself to charge at his teammate. His legs carried him rapidly over the sandy ground before he threw himself shoulder first at his training partner. In the second before impact, a golden barrier spread outwards from the shining shield. Nathan crashed through it before impacting the metal. Katja held him back easily, but Nathan wasn't trying to knock him over. It was faster that time. and tougher, more imbued with the will to protect. Nathan's ability to give detailed feedback was invaluable to Kachi, and his magic was progressing by leaps and bounds. The divine power was more potent, quicker to activate and more focused since he'd made the decision to focus more on the magic to the expense of martial ability. Kachi could heal at range now and could wreath his hammer in divine energy in a bare second. Not to be outdone, Nathan pushed himself to get better at hand-to-hand combat. He focused on getting comfortable parrying weapons with his bare hands. The practice made clear the benefits of his rage, with the enhanced speed, strength, and toughness allowing him to catch a full-strength strike from one of Arl's unenchanted swords on his outer forearm. He'd stop the blade cold and come away with little more than an easily healed graze. Those practice bouts with Arl were quite even, though Nathan had to admit they played to his strengths. Arl wasn't using enchanted weapons and couldn't run away to gain distance. He'd frantically batter at Nathan, trying to keep him from getting in close to grapple. Every time Nathan managed to grab hold of Arl, he was able to overpower the younger man quickly. The spear is a weapon for big monsters. Fighting other people, the speed of my fists is the way to go. I just need to get my hands on them, and then my enhanced strength can usually win the day. Nathan had some free time most afternoons and had been cashing in on his magic absorption, for favors and profits. Herden had called him in to help curse break a few items she'd had stored away. It was challenging but interesting work, and he'd had to regenerate his hand after a cursed bow ate the original. Literally ate it, the weapon growing a pair of wooden jaws and snapping off the limb. I doubt most people would consider that an interesting afternoon. After a few sessions, he'd broken a few items but managed to uncurse some others. Herden was pleased and paid Nathan in both favors and coin, promising that she'd help him figure out if the next item he curse-broke was safe to use. Mid-tier Identify 6 achieved. The next afternoon, Stella beckoned Nathan to follow her as she went to meet her parents. They've managed to scrounge up a pile of contaminated conductive quartz. If you want more favors, this is a way to get them. Nathan was only too thrilled to follow, though he was expecting to be grilled about the lightning insight. Instead, Cullo bowed her head to him. "We acknowledge the weight of the insights you have given our daughter. Are you willing to do us another favor?" Dallo looked like he wanted to say more, but Cullo shot him a firm glare, which repeated itself every time it looked like Dallo wanted to bring up the subject of Nathan's insights. Instead, they fed Nathan a good dinner, then asked him to purify a pile of conductive quartz contaminated with mana of all kinds. Nathan got familiar with even more varieties of mana, from the shifting strength of metal mana to the sharp-edged slickness of what Nathan could only call salt mana. Maybe just crystal mana, mid-tier spell sense 9 achieved. After he was done, Dallo inspected the crystals. He looked pleased and turned to Nathan. "I will ask Kia to teach you her airwalking talent. This favor and the others, they are a heavy burden and it would go far to balance those scales. She knows how much Stella means to us." "Oh yeah. Next best thing to flight, here I come. Honestly, it might be better than straight flight if it lets me use all of my movement skills." The other adventuring teams were getting sent out on their own long-distance missions, killing monsters or clearing out lairs around the villages. It seemed to be going well, and it wasn't uncommon for a team to swagger in and brag about the levels they'd earned. But the heirs didn't feel the need to keep up. They were already ahead and spent a lot of time just hanging out and chatting. The barriers between them were few and growing fewer. Nathan felt at home with them in a way he only had with his closest friends on Earth. They talked about hopes, fears, and dreams. Their deepening friendships led to discussions of politics, ambitions, and what they would do with their growing power. No decisions were made, but they all spoke of ending evils and protecting the people of Gemor in new ways. The heirs were realizing that they had agency, and the power to back up their opinions with meaningful actions. All too soon, graduation was upon them. On the day before the solstice, Jalba laid out what would happen. This news was new to most people, since Sudriel was co-opting a tangle of various traditions for her ceremony. The solstice was a day where the sun would not appear. It would vanish one day as it usually did, a dark line sliding across the glowing orb, and then it would not appear the next day. The night sky would grow darker than usual, and wavering lines of light would replace the glowing landscape that usually spread across the sky. The sun would reappear on the dawn of the second day. It was tradition for adventurers to trek up to the very top of Gemor to guard the seal during the solstice, when the sky was dark. The seal would start glowing, shining brightly enough to light up the sky at noon. Sudriel would give a speech before having them swear the adventurer's oath, next to the glowing seal. It sounded like a whole thing. Nathan had another dinner with the guardians of Gemor, catching up with Leska and Zarian. They seemed very pleased that Nathan was keeping up with the heirs. Zarian's wife Krisa confided in Nathan that they'd been worried about the heirs being completely dependent on their parents, and mostly cut off from the broader adventurer society because of it. They were glad that Nathan was an outside influence. Though I'm not exactly a great bridge to the rest of the adventurers. Some kind of horse trading went on behind the scenes, and Kia agreed to teach Nathan the airwalking talent. After he swore the adventurer's oath at graduation, all too soon, it was the day before the solstice. Their classes had wrapped up without fanfare, and Nathan had never seen the Adventurers Guild so packed. The giant traders along with dozens of other teams were back in Gemor for the occasion. Nathan noticed that a lot of the adventurers were tense and wary. He found Vihala. Why are the adventurers treating this like the eve of battle? The broad, dark woman set down her ale and wiped her lips. She looked the same as when Nathan had first met her outside Tial's tower. When she answered him, it was with a frown. Bad things happen on the solstice. Big monster attacks, strange magic. People say the seal wakes it all up, that all the monsters in the world want to break the seal on the solstice. So we guard it, and the city people take refuge in the fortresses under the mountain. The villages hunker down too, but they've never been attacked. The monsters go for the seal. She shrugged. Most years nothing happens, but when something does happen, it's always a battle worthy of remembering. On the worst years, a few questers show up to help out. That hasn't happened for decades. Nathan thanked her, then spent a few hours trying to relax with the heirs. They were all nervous, both about graduation and the oath, as well as the solstice itself. They played some card games to pass the time, conversing about training and what kinds of jobs they wanted to take after graduation. Nathan didn't fully relax until he meditated before bed. There was a sense of impending doom hanging over everything. But what would come, would come. Nathan had done what he could to prepare himself and his friends for any threat they could reasonably handle. Worrying about it now would only hamper his readiness. Anything that came at Gemor would need to contend with a city full of formidable adventurers, ranging from the guardians of Gemor all the way down to Nathan and the other trainees. The next morning was quiet, as if a pall had fallen over the city. The heirs woke up earlier than usual but didn't do their normal exercises, instead trooping over to the dining hall in the pre-dawn gloom. The sky was growing darker, with the continents overhead fading as dawn approached. Dozens of faint pinpricks of lights slowly replaced the normal skyscape. They were in various colors, from purple to red, and looked something like stars in the sky, but spaced at regular intervals. Breakfast was subdued. All the trainees ate in silence, quickly finishing a hearty meal heavy on carbohydrates. Then Jalba ushered them out of the dining hall, and together they started to climb the mountain that Gemor was built into. The trainees were joined by all the other adventurers in the city, forming a silent pilgrimage up the steep slope. Every adventurer Nathan had met was in the procession, from Artha and the giant traders to Eldred and the vanguard and the guardians of Gemor. The city was well lit by magical lights mounted on buildings, and the guard was out in force. Nathan looked back over his shoulder and saw the wall fully manned, with lights shining outwards onto the killing field around the city. They walked up towards the peak of the city. The sky was even darker now, and Nathan realized how accustomed he'd become to the glowing world overhead. Now it was gone. Nathan felt like he was alone in the wilderness back on Earth, with a black sky pressing down upon him. The mood was somber as everybody felt the oppressive darkness, with few conversations as they climbed the steep slopes of Gemor. Nathan saw city folk hurrying past in the dark. They carried magical lights or torches and congregated around the entrances to the bunkers dug into the mountain. The guard was also manning the bunkers, though not as heavily as the outer walls of the city. They're preparing for a full-scale attack. They climbed higher than Nathan had ever been, to the council chambers sheltered under the overarching stone. The building was ancient, obviously original to old Gemor, and possessed of a level of craftsmanship and elegance that reminded Nathan of the Sagrada Familia or Hagia Sophia. Nathan spent a moment examining the building, admiring its grand scale, flowing stone architecture and clear defensive nature, before Sarah elbowed him and gestured onwards. They walked past the council chambers to a grand staircase that cut through the stone. The staircase led into a broad and high-ceilinged tunnel that climbed up the inside of the cresting wave of stone that hung over much of Gemor. The stairs were wide and shallow, the space dimly lit by magical lights set into the walls. With so many people in the enclosed space, the sounds of boots and hooves on stone echoed loudly, only interspersed by the occasional cough. Still nobody spoke. It was a solemn occasion, full of majesty. That sense of majesty redoubled when they reached the end of the staircase, which led onto a broad and mostly flat area atop the mountain. The dark sky stretched above, seemingly ready to swallow them in its enormity. As Nathan gazed upwards, his eyes adjusted, and the distant dots of light came into view once more. Nathan might have imagined it, but he thought he saw threads of light connecting the dots. The lines shifted in color and wavered like a faint aurora borealis. Nathan tore his gaze from the sky as the crowd of adventurers pushed through the chill wind of the mountain peak. They were high above the ruined city of Old Gemor, standing on the curved top of the mountain. The stone underfoot was natural and rough, and there were no railings. The area around them curved down gradually for hundreds of feet on either side of the ridge-like mountain top. In one direction that slope suddenly dropped away over the city of Gemor, and in the other it continued down the steep back of the wave-shaped mountain. They were headed towards the seal. It had been described to Nathan like a big stone door set into the top of the mountain. Now that he saw it in person, he'd say it reminded him of a vault door from the Fallout games. Glowing blue lines traced a pattern like an irising camera lens on the 40-foot-wide stone circle, and a beam of light shot upwards from the center of the seal. Nathan squinted and could make out spidery symbols glowing on the recessed stone surface. They looked nothing like the enchantments Nathan had grown somewhat familiar with through Herden's tutelage. On the other side of the seal was a wide plinth, supporting an obelisk whose outline was vague in the darkness. Sudriel stepped up onto the plinth in front of the obelisk and was lit from beneath by the light from the seal. She was dressed in a sleek breastplate and fine chainmail, carrying her spear like a staff of office. Her voice was loud and shocking after the lack of conversation on their journey. "Take up your assigned positions. Trainees stay here. Scouting revealed no groupings of monsters, so we should be safe. But consider this the start of your final lesson. Take no chances on the solstice." Chapter 68. The Tales of Endings. There was a moment of silence after Sudriel's words, then the creak of leather and scrape of boots as the experienced adventurers formed a perimeter around the blue-glowing seal. Several teams took to the sky, led by the Guardians of Gemor as Dalo cast mass flight. The trainees remained in a large clump next to the seal, separated by team. They looked around to ensure that they weren't supposed to be doing anything, some talking in quiet voices. Simla and his team were nearby, and Nathan noticed Simla shooting glances at him. Behind them were Nornan and the Dust Eaters, laughing at a quiet joke. The trainees stood and muttered for a few minutes before another figure came into view atop the plinth, lit from below by the iridescent light of the seal. It was Phaeline. Her hair blew in the wind, and the light reflecting from the colored streaks looked like a stream of viridian sparks. Green eyes flashed with light, and her voice cut through the wind more cleanly than Sudriel's yell, reaching all of the adventurers spread around the mountaintop. Her speech was formal, with a ritualistic cadence. And now we begin the oldest of the guild's traditions, the story of the slain and the spinning of their stories. Listen and learn, for the lessons of this lecture are as much a part of our guild as the ground of Gemor. This is a time when we speak of endings. I begin with the tale of a man known only by deed and legacy, a man long dead, whose shadow looms long upon us all. His name was Istin, and at first he had no other, for Istin was born a slave of Giant's Rest. He was no soldier, but a worker who cleaned trash and scrubbed floors. When the slaves rose to cast Giant's Rest down, Istin was one of them. That day was darker than the sky of today, but Istin stood with his fellows. He fought mages that blasted them with fire and death. He killed one with a broom and was badly wounded by another. His class developed from that fight, and he was the first of my kind. The kind of adventurer who creeps in the darkness and strikes from the shadows. An assassin of Gemor, who strikes those who think themselves invulnerable in their fortresses. And he chose his name that day, as Bo. Nathan noticed the trainees with the dark skin and broad frame of the bows stand straighter as Phaeline named their ancestor. Phaeline proceeded to tell of Istin Bo's adventurers, how he had delved into the dungeons of old Gemor and killed Giant's Rest mages and their households in the darkness of night. Many of his friends died, but he and a few others achieved a high level. They had families, gathered magical items, and protected Gemor from the early assaults of Giant's Rest. Phaeline told how he'd had children and started the Bo clan to follow in his footsteps as an adventurer of Gemor. There were many whose stories are the same, and many are descended from them. Gemor owes its existence to the first generation of adventurers, but Istin's story is always told first today, on the solstice. And that is because he was the first to kill an archmage. The archmage Gralis raised his faction and marched the streets of Giant's Rest with scores of mages, ranks of golems and legions of slave soldiers. His parade was a showcase of pageantry and power, a declaration of his designs upon Gemor. Istin Bo killed him before he left the city. He leapt from a rooftop and used an old Gemor blast disc to shatter the shield of Gralis' platform before butchering him beyond any hope of healing. He cast the would-be conqueror's head toward the other archmages and declared, thus to those who threaten Gemor, to this day, any archmage who considers attacking our city must consider Istin's lesson. Phaeline raised her arms to the sky, looking upwards towards the lights. Her voice grew more strident, like a prophet leading a prayer. And on this day, the day of the solstice, a day of remembrance for those lost, remember Istin's lesson. For though Istin killed Gralis and the invasion was stopped, Istin was slain by the assembled mages of Giant's Rest in turn. The first duty of an adventurer of Gemor is to protect its people. The final duty is to be willing to do whatever it takes to accomplish that goal. For we must teach Istin's lesson again and again to greedy Giant's Rest. The cost of that lesson is in the lives of the adventurers of Gemor. We can make them fear the cost of their invasion, but only by being willing to stake our own lives on that cost. She pointed towards the assembled trainees, and her hand was suddenly filled with a long dagger which seemed to cut the light of the seal. And that is Istin's lesson. To safeguard our home, we must be more committed to protecting Gemor than Giant's Rest is to conquering us. With that pronouncement, Phelan lowered her hand. Her glowing green eyes stared into the crowd of trainees, and Nathan could swear that she was looking straight at him. The assassins of Gemor teach this lesson. If you wish to hunt mages unseen, to teach them the meaning of fear, speak of it. We will find you and teach you to kill all who reside in Giant's Rest. Her mouth curved in a smile and one eye flashed pink before she vanished. Nathan focused his mind, trying to see through what was likely a very advanced stealth talent or collection of powerful skills. Awfully bloodthirsty, she's gotta be some kind of assassin variant. With the darkness and the shifting light cast by the seal, Nathan caught not a trace of the elusive woman. The trainees broke out in whispers. Arl leaned into the center of their small circle. She's scary. I wouldn't want to go into the heart of Giant's Rest for any reason. Kachai spoke a little louder in his response, making heads turn in their direction. There is reason for all to listen when she speaks. Kadid was the next to climb to the top of the plinth and be illuminated by the seal. Now it's time to speak of those we knew. I'll start with my nephew Tygel Bo, who died this past summer to a northern wyvern. He proceeded to tell Tygel's story, who he was, how he'd lived, and how he'd died. Oh, this is a time for eulogies. Adventurer after adventurer mounted the plinth, telling the tales of adventurers past. Not all of these people had died in the past year, with some particularly glorious stories having been passed down from generation to generation. Many of the stories were long, but the trainees stood rapt, hearing the tales of their predecessors. The legends of those who had come before them as adventurers of Gemor. Not all of them had died in battle, and some of the most celebrated were those who had lived through all of their years and raised a new generation of adventurers. Others had died without witnesses, and there was a lot of, and then they went into the dungeon and never came out. One recent example of that was the Grey Moon Order. They had gone into the monastery of Quaz on the most recent delve day, the one that the grave Tangle had come out of. They had been a group of scholars and mages who focused on necromancy and the safe disarming of Quazian ruins. The one telling their story was an old crowfolk woman named Gale Shullet. She headed the Tower of Trickery, where illusion mages like William were trained. Gale didn't judge the Grey Moon Order. She just seemed sad that experienced adventurers had died to something that probably wasn't their fault. There was another lesson there that was communicated through the stories being told. Sometimes you failed and died, and it wasn't your fault. Sometimes there was an undetectable sensor in a random corridor that set off a bomb, unleashed a magical plague, or awoke an ancient army. Some of the stories were funny, some were sad. All were proud of the legacy of the adventurers of Gemor. Nathan felt the weight of tradition start to press down upon him. These stories communicated what being an adventurer of Gemor meant. It meant glory in battle, standing against impossible odds, and being willing to die to protect the city. Most of the adventurers around Nathan were descended from those whose stories they were hearing, and Nathan felt like an intruder in this space. He hadn't been raised here. He had come to Gemor only a few months ago, and now he was taking part in their most sacred ceremony. Nathan found himself awed at this beautiful tradition, the way it encouraged new adventurers to feel part of something larger than themselves. Indeed, many of the faces around him were awestruck and wet with tears. The stories continued, and the light of the seal grew more focused, more intense. Instead of a directed glow, it projected a beam of light up into the air. Enough diffused out to light the top of the mountain, but the beam seemed to thicken and intensify until it reflected off the sparse clouds overhead. I bet that would be actually blinding to look into from above. We're only seeing a tiny spillover of light from here. You don't see a laser if you're standing next to it, only the reflection from what it's pointed at. As the night continued, the clouds dispersed, and the other points of light in the sky also brightened. The aurora that Nathan thought he had imagined earlier proved to be very real, connecting the lights in the sky with a wavering iridescence that was beautiful to behold. The day wore on, and the stories continued. Nathan learned of other teams who had died, some recently, some famously, some both. Nathan could tell who supported Sudriel's agenda and who didn't by the message of their stories, by how they described the deeds of past adventurers. The event was too solemn and serious for the petty politics to emerge into the open, but the subtext of the progressive and traditional factions of adventurers was clear. Nathan was listening to a slightly rambling story about a team called the Sky Spears, who had died 5 years ago fighting a rock elemental. He found himself watching the sky. The dots of light overhead had only increased in brightness, and the shifting streamers of light coming off them looked like a distant spiderweb blowing in a cosmic wind. Then Nathan saw another aurora much closer to hand. It was branching off of the beam emerging from the seal. The clouds had cleared, and he saw a wavering banner of light stretching off to the north. Wait, are all those points seals? Just ones on the world above my head. That's big. Nathan squinted upwards, trying to use the light to make out the continents above, but he was interrupted by a thump from the dais. Sudriel stood there, lit brightly by the seal. Its glow was ramping up faster and faster, casting shadows behind everybody nearby. Sudriel brought the butt of her spear down on the dais again with another thump, then raised her voice in a yell. We are blessed by a peaceful solstice, and so it is time for the tale of endings. A story older than Gemor, older than Giant's Rest, told across Davrar. The faint burble of conversation died completely, leaving only the breeze that soon calmed itself. It felt like the whole world was waiting for Sudriel to continue. She spoke slowly, clearly, as if reciting an oral epic. It had a kind of rhythmic meter to it, though it wouldn't carry over to English. The solstice and the seal are oldest tradition, but older yet is the tale remembered past the ending of the world. The tale of endings is not something written. It is for times when writing is lost, times when civilization dies, when there is no priority but survival. Remember the endings when cities die and the land breaks. If you lose all else, if nothing else will survive, preserve yourselves and preserve the tale of endings. This is the story of how the world ends. We record not what was lost, but how it was lost. The prophecy will allow survival of the endings. There was a moment of absolute silence, and Sudriel leaned on her spear, gathering herself before launching stridently into the next part of the tale of endings. The world has ended before, and will end again. The order of the endings is the only part of the story that truly matters. Magic gods, monsters, undeath, wrath, storm, deicide elements, history, spite, silence. Sudriel paused and continued in a more normal voice. Those who founded Giant's Rest survived the ending of elements, and next is the ending of history. We clear the dungeons, that history's wrath may pass us by. Now, again, and remember. Her tone grew formal once more as she recited the list a second time. This time, the crowd chanted the endings along with her. Nathan joined in, remembering the order from the first recital. As he spoke, Nathan closed his eyes and came up with a mnemonic story for the endings, to ensure he would never forget them. Magic gods, monsters, undeath, wrath, storm, deicide elements, history, spite, silence. There was a moment of silence, then Sudriel continued. 3 pieces of advice follow, 3 for the essentials of food, water, and shelter. First, make common cause, for the endings will kill all. Second, the ending will last 3 generations, plan for repeated catastrophe. Third, survival above all else. Sudriel slammed her spear down on the plinth for the third and final time, gazing at the beam of light cast upwards by the seal, as if waiting for something. The pillar of brightness pulsed in recognition before the light blazed brighter than ever before. There was a faint cry as the other trainees shied back and covered their eyes. So that's the tale of endings. I swear that I'll keep the story alive, however long I may live. This memory, that mnemonic, is stored in the freezer in my mind palace, where it will never change or degrade so long as I exist. Congratulations, you have developed the mid-tier enhanced memory utility skill into high-tier enhanced memory. High-tier enhanced memory. You have a detailed mental construct to aid with memory, and a mental process to help you encode information into it. This skill will help you store and recall memories quickly. This process operates quickly and cannot be interfered with by outside sources. With time and effort, you can recall older memories and store them in the mental construct. Nathan blinked away the box and looked upwards, seeing that the pulse of light hadn't just come from here. The spots overhead had also flared with brightness, and the aurora pattern blazed as the tendrils above Nathan reached up and met those reaching down from the dots far overhead. The filaments of light illuminated the object they were reaching towards, a featureless orb in the sky. It was made tiny by distance and directly overhead, where the sun usually was. More tendrils came from the sides, joining as the entire world was lit by flowing tendrils of magic. Nathan could feel the power in the light now. It was like every form of magic all at once. Only the barest wisps of it reached Nathan, but it felt like the energies of creation. He tried to separate out the components of what he was sensing, but it was like trying to pull one strand of wire from a twisted cable supporting a bridge that crossed an ocean. The light was bright enough to illuminate the world overhead, and Nathan saw that the other lights, the other seals, were almost all placed on continents. Some of them were centered on the virulent patches of white and black, looking like the sources of an infection. And then, after an instant or a quarter hour of gazing spellbound into the sky, the magic tapered off. It happened smoothly but rapidly as the seal's magic ramped down. Before Nathan knew it, the seal was just lighting the top of the mountain once more, no longer illuminating Davrar for miles in every direction. Nearly forgotten, Sudriel raised her spear to gather the trainees' attention. That is why we defend the seal on the day of the solstice. She seemed to deflate. I will say a few things on the tale of endings before we move to the adventurer's oath. Hear my words. I believe that only the prophecy of endings and the three-part advice is original to the tale, and all else has changed over time. It is a feeling that there is a groove worn into the world by this tale. It has been told for many thousands of years, and on this night it is easier to tell truth than to mistake. She coughed dryly and took a drink from a water skin, leaning heavily on her spear. But the old woman's duty was not yet done. The adventurer's oath. You will ascend to this platform and swear to me and the gathered adventurers that you will protect the people of Gemor from monsters, enemies, and endings with your life. The embellishments of the oath are up to you, but you will swear by Davrar and the endings. The other adventurers had relaxed their vigilance and were grouping around the trainees. They didn't seem to be expecting an attack anymore. Sudriel focused their attention. Let the heir start. Come forward. Another voice interrupted, young and tense with anxiety. Wait, there is one of the heirs who should not swear the oath. Nathan Lark learned of the endings this very night. He does not know our ways and we do not know his. He shall not become an adventurer of Gemor. I heard him say he is not even of Davrar. Nathan turned to see who had spoken. It was Simla, and his outstretched hand was pointing directly at Nathan. Chapter 69. An Aurora Dual Simla glared at the bewildered adventurers with a challenging look on his face. I speak true. Nathan Lark comes from beyond Davrar itself. He is alien, and we should not welcome him into our ranks, nor let him swear our most sacred of oaths. He did not know of the endings until just now. How can he defend the people of Gemor against them? Who knows what his ways truly are? Sudriel looked down upon Simla, visibly peeved. What does it matter from where Nathan comes? The adventurers of Gemor have always allowed wanderers to join and swear, even those who have lost the tradition of endings. Be silent, Simla. I have deemed Nathan worthy, and that is enough, no matter how others may complain. Her gaze passed across Eldred, eyes hardening. In reply, a rough voice pitched across the mountaintop. Do not deny that Simla's words hold the weight of truth. If this boy is not from Davrar itself, then we will know more. I do not think I speak for just myself in this. Or do you finally give me reason to challenge you, Sudriel? The source of the voice emerged from the crowd of adventurers. It was an old man with a grizzled, salt-and-pepper beard and hair. He was tall and broad, standing like a craggy granite outcrop. He clutched a pair of heavily enchanted javelins in one hand, more poked up from a quiver over his shoulder. Eldred was standing near Simla and cheered the newcomer. Speak the weighty truths, Khazar. Sudriel turned to address the old man. Khazar, you'd use this as excuse to challenge me, the man shrugged. Let the boy speak for himself. We've truth-telling skills enough to know if he speaks true. Your pets should be able to defend themselves, and there have been claims that he acts dishonorably. He tilted his head towards Eldred, then gestured for Nathan to take the floor. Nathan stepped forward and passed Kachai, who frowned and gave him a concerned look. Thoughts flickered through Nathan's head. I didn't expect this. It seems like a setup, partly political. The traditional faction of adventurers is coming after me as a way to get to Sudriel and the heirs. Then Nathan's attention landed on Eldred, who was standing at Simla's shoulders and grinning cruelly. This is Eldred's scheme. He couldn't challenge me, but he found somebody who could. He helped Simla spy on me, then goaded him to do this. He just doesn't want me to be an adventurer. Nathan felt the ember of rage at his core kindle to life. This was petty adventurer drama bullshit, and he was not pleased about it. I want to make these assholes regret screwing with me. How do I respond? Clearly can't lie. Fuck it, my skill helps me be honest. So it's time to be earnest. Flip the script. Nathan focused his mind past the growing anger and rolled his shoulders as he walked up next to the seal. He turned and looked over the crowd of adventurers. Some of the gazes coming his way were hostile, but most were merely curious. It is true, I come from beyond Davrar. I was brought here by magic, by the power of an archmage of Giant's Rest. He sought to control me, but I escaped. The giant traders rescued me and brought me to Gemor. The Adventurers Guild of Gemor has taken me in, become my refuge against this world with all of its terrors and monsters of all shapes. Gemor has become my new home, and I will fight to protect it. Or would you turn away all who ask for help and can help in return? That seems a path to a proud and selfish death. Nathan met Khazar's eyes, which studied him coldly. Mid-tier earnestness 10 achieved. Congratulations, you have maxed out this utility skill. It cannot be improved any further. You must achieve insight into this skill to develop it to high tier. Simla stepped up to face Nathan in response, every inch a warrior prince. His sleek armor was patterned with gold and silver engravings. His hands rested on well-crafted hilts rising from each hip, and a polished bow peeked over his shoulder. Golden eyes glowed faintly at Nathan as they studied each other. Simla sneered, then spoke. You speak a pretty story, enough so that I suspect you have a skill to help you. But I wonder, how will you weigh your life when the next ending comes, when it seeks to choke all life from the land and bury us under the weight of history? Nathan seethed at Simla's attack. He couldn't outright deny he had a social manipulation skill, but he'd been right in assuming that accusing your enemies of having one was a cheap but valid tactic. But he could use his earnestness to respond. Nathan considered his next words carefully, seeking to turn the moment to his advantage. This reveal of the endings pisses me off. They speak as if the endings are unavoidable apocalypses which can only be weathered, not fought. They scheme against each other like crabs in a bucket, not thinking to challenge the bucket. but they know what the future endings are going to be, so they're deterministic. Something must be causing them. Whatever that is can be worked against. It's gotta be some kind of magical bullshit anyway. I bet there's some magical crystal somewhere that triggers it all. Maybe beneath this very seal. I'm anti-magic, so I might be able to break it. Nathan locked gazes with Simla, speaking with a cold fury. In my birthplace, there is a saying said with many meanings. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. To me, it means that no enemy, however terrible, cannot be fought. I will not only protect Gemor from the endings. I will swear my adventurer's oath to prevent the endings altogether. I will fight back, not merely fight to survive. There was a moment of hushed silence across the entire mountaintop, followed by scattered whispers. Nathan noticed Khazar snort, opening his mouth to speak derisively. Nathan spoke first to cut the man off. He looked past Simla to the other adventurers, to the heirs. Who will join me in this quest to end the endings? Khazar's eyebrows rose and he looked mirthful. Eldred guffawed. Simla smirked. Nobody will join you in that stupid dream, I think. He was interrupted as the heirs brushed past him, moving to stand behind Nathan as one. Congratulations, you have developed the mid-tier earnestness, utility skill into high-tier earnestness. Utility skill, high-tier earnestness. This skill will help you portray your intense conviction and honesty when you interact with people. This skill will encourage people to follow your example in words and actions. Cannot fool truth spells or skills. Kachai raised his voice first, his chin high and eyes shining with golden light. I will stand with Nathan Lark to challenge the very heavens. He put his hand on Nathan's shoulder, continuing in a whisper meant just for Nathan and the other heirs. He was preparing to challenge you. Challenge him first. Stella placed her hand on his other shoulder, continuing where Kachai had left off. We are the heirs to traditions that span worlds. If anyone can do this, it is us. Her hand sparked where it touched Nathan's skin, and he glanced at her. Stella grinned back malevolently, her eyes lit with lightning as she silently channeled electricity mana into his skin. Arl spoke up, jaw set as he glared at Simla. We must move beyond tradition, beyond merely embracing the past. We must build upon it, for how else will things be better than they were? Sarah picked up from him, just as stridently as the others. We stand upon the shoulders of the adventurers of Gemor who came before us. We are the heirs who inherit their power. It is up to us to use it responsibly, to not just react to the evils of the world but to act against them. The heirs stood before the assembled adventurers of Gemor, having just declared their purpose. Nathan's eyes fell on Simla, who looked perplexed. This clearly hadn't been part of the script. Time to throw it off a little more. Simla, I challenge you to a duel to submission, here and now, for seeking to prevent me from becoming an adventurer, for sullying my name and honor. I'm mad enough to challenge him to a duel to the death, but that's not how these duels work, and that's my rage talking anyway. The princely adventurer, lit by the light cast from behind Nathan, blinked at him for a moment. Then he grinned a vulpine grin and his hands tightened around the hilts at his hips. I accept. I will fight you atop the seal. It shall be our ring. Nathan glanced behind him at the wide disk of stone. The light cast from it was dimming, but it was still bright enough it would make visibility difficult. You know, I do remember getting offered that blinding resistance talent. Sudriel and Dalo yelled in denial at the same time. No. They looked at each other, then Dalo waved his hand, and a 30-foot wide circle of low flames sprouted from the rock. Fight here instead. The seal is not a place for a duel. He eyed Nathan with trepidation. I was so caught up in how cool it would be that I didn't even think that maybe it would be a bad thing to drain the magic from the seal. For now. Sudriel relaxed with Dalo's actions. Then she spoke again. I declare this duel fair. Do any disagree? She glared at Khazar, who smirked back at her. Who will stand for Simla Bola? I will. Eldred walked forward, putting a hand on Simla's shoulder. "And so shall I." Khazar's voice rang out across the top of the mountain, though Eldred frowned at him. Eldred leaned down to whisper into Simla's ear, eyes flicking to Nathan. His hands moved subtly down near his side, Eldred's armored bulk hiding it when he surreptitiously pressed a small disc into Simla's hands. "I wonder what that was." Khazar ran a steely eye over Nathan and the heirs. "And who will stand for Nathan Lark?" Kia fell out of the sky in full armor and slammed into the ground beside Nathan. She landed in a classic superhero pose, knee pressed into the stone and greatsword held sideways in one hand. She ripped off her helmet and latched it to her belt as she stood. "I will." The holy warrior spared Khazar a glare before turning and examining Nathan. He shivered under the intensity of her gaze, but she merely stepped in and whispered quietly, "The spear won't do you any good. Simla's resource is precision, and he's got skills for speed. He'll seek to bleed you with his enchanted blades, but he will go for a deeper cut if given the opportunity. Watch for the tendons in your legs." She noticed Stella's hand on Nathan's shoulder, faintly sparking as the mage continued to pour magic into Nathan. Stella had to have dumped thousands of mana into him by this point, way more than she was supposed to have in her mana pool. Nathan noted the distinct, jittery feeling of stamina overload and was having trouble staying still. Kia snorted, the edges of her lips twitching faintly before she put her helmet back on. "Humble him, Nathan. It will shame those who stand for him." Then Nathan stood bare-handed just inside the ring, facing Simla from 20 feet away. Khazar and Eldred observed from one side, Kia from the other. As one, Kia and Khazar held aloft their weapons. "Begin." Nathan settled into a fighting stance, struggling not to fidget with the excess stamina and anger coursing through him. He wasn't quite as juiced up as after draining the massive necromancy crystal, but this time he was very pissed off. Simla drew his weapons in a flashy pattern and began walking towards Nathan slowly. "I need to keep my rage in check. Can't kill him. But I believe I can keep it under control. These duels are as much about public opinion as winning. But God, do I want to beat his face to a bloody pulp." Nathan activated his rage and sprinted at Simla, meeting him in the center of the arena. Simla's eyes widened in surprise as Nathan threw his body forward, hoping the smaller man would try to block his momentum. But Simla did the clever thing instead, sliding deftly to the side and striking high and low at Nathan's side. Simla's feet took him farther than they should have, and his blades reached farther than their length would suggest. Nathan snapped out his arm to deflect the sword going for his gut. He tried to bring his hand down to grab the blade, but the sword cut and was gone in an instant. A stinging pain shot from cuts in his arm and leg, and Nathan hissed in frustration as the cut to the back of his knee made it hard to bend that leg. Blood dripped, staining the ground of the arena. Eldred cheered loudly. "Those blades are heavily enchanted, all right. Sharpness, extra cutting force, and a bleeding enchantment, I think. Nothing dimensional, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's a talent giving them extra reach and maybe letting them cut more than they should." The magical signature left by the bleeding enchantment snuffed out as Nathan kept his eyes on Simla. The younger man prowled around him like a puma facing down an elk. He didn't keep contact long enough for my antimagic to do much work on those swords. But I only gotta grab him once, and he knows it. Nathan turned, keeping his eyes on Simla as his wounds quickly healed. The smaller man's every step seemed to slide across the stone, moving him deceptively far. Simla lunged to the side where he'd cut Nathan's knee, cutting low at Nathan's ankle. His motions were fast and precise as the swords flickered out. Nathan pivoted and lashed out with a kick to Simla's torso. Simla had been expecting Nathan's movements to be slowed by the knee injury, and he pulled his attack as he dodged away from Nathan's blow. But Nathan jumped forward, and the kick struck Simla's chest. There was an audible crack as the breastplate absorbed the blow, and several of the glowing enchantments went dark. Simla was tossed back but unharmed by the rib-snapping kick. Nathan's fury demanded that he follow through, and he chased Simla as the smaller man tried to retreat and regroup. Nathan didn't give him room, remembering his practice with Arl. He needed to get in close, to grab Simla and pound the bejesus out of him. Nathan was very much looking forward to punching the smirk off that face. Simla edged away, but Nathan was careful not to build up too much momentum and get baited into overextending. He had movement skills of his own, and when Simla skittered aside, he matched the movements. Nathan lunged forward and reached out, relying on his movement skills to keep his balance. Simla backpedaled furiously, flicking quick strikes at Nathan with both hands. His movements were fast, but every strike was precisely aimed and scored light wounds on Nathan. He's got a bunch of movement and weapon skills. A talent making his steps move farther, and another to make his swords cut deeply. My skin should be as tough as metal right now, but his lightest strike is still spilling blood. Good thing I can make more of that from stamina. Nathan kept up with Simla and managed to dodge half the man's lightning-quick strikes. The other half he caught on his arms. A few slipped through, gouging at Nathan's ribs. Mid-tier dodging footwork 4 achieved. The injuries were deep, but the bleeding stopped and the wounds began healing only seconds after being delivered. His stamina was still full. Beyond full. Thanks, Stella. Simla was going all out, his face a mask of concentration as he kept striking at Nathan while skittering from side to side. But Nathan was still closing in and wouldn't let the lithe man break away. Simla wasn't as good as Arl. In the same league, but not as good. And while Simla was faster than Nathan's usual training partner, he didn't have weapons with sufficient weight to keep Nathan back, no matter how well they cut. Nathan could just take the blows and keep coming, so long as Simla didn't hit anything vital. And this was a duel to submission, not death. Nathan slid forward as Simla struck at Nathan's head and chest. Nathan ducked the top blow and caught the other sword in his left hand. It cut deep into his palm, grating over the bones beneath. Got you. Nathan clamped his hand on the blade, feeling its magic flicker as his antimagic tore at the enchantment. Simla yanked the blade backwards, trying to slice open Nathan's hand. But Nathan's hold was too strong and the blade didn't budge. In the grips of his rage, Nathan felt triumph. He felt unstoppable. The enchantment fell to pieces as Nathan brought his other hand down on Simla's sword, snapping off the last 2/3 of its length. He cast aside the fragment of blade, then brought his hand up in front of his face before clenching his fist. Blood squirted out between Nathan's fingers and he leapt at Simla again. Simla juked and dodged with inhuman grace, but Nathan wasn't letting him play matador. He picked up a few quick cuts from Simla's single scything blade, but he could tell the enchantment on the second sword was starting to fray. Simla drew out the object Eldred had given him, gritting his teeth in a snarl as he cast it at Nathan's feet. Khazar saw the action and threw out a hand. No. Simla dived backwards and laid himself flat. Nathan had only an instant to throw himself into a forward roll before the magical bomb went off. A wave of heat and pressure buffeted Nathan, and he only partially absorbed the blast. Chips of stone flew past, gouging his flesh. His roll became a flip as the pressure wave carried Nathan over the prone Simla. Nathan spun in midair and landed on his feet, staggering sideways to avoid leaving the ring of fire demarking the dueling arena. Low-tier tumbling 10 achieved. Blood ran from a cut on Nathan's forehead, but he glared down at Simla as the man got shakily to his feet. The center of their ring was blasted and broken, a crater marking where the explosive item had detonated. Oh, we're doing killing blows now. Guess the rules of the duel just changed. Nathan glared his hate as he advanced, yanking a spike of stone from his side. The younger man darted a glance over at Khazar, who looked furious, but the older man didn't interfere. High-tier regeneration 7 achieved. Simla looked back at Nathan and his unhurried gait, swallowing. He raised his sword once again, then feinted and dove low, looking to slice at the back of Nathan's ankles as he rolled unnaturally far with a gymnast's precision. Played that trick one too many times. Nathan kicked Simla in the chest mid-dive, sending him spinning into the air. Then he leapt forward and grabbed Simla's ankle right before the man hit the ground. Nathan swung the man through the air like a sack, planning on bashing his skull into the ground repeatedly. He's just an obstacle, not a true enemy. I won't break my word for him. Save that for Giant's Rest. Instead of following through, Nathan spun in a half circle and threw Simla from the arena, watching him fly over the circle of flames. That was a near thing. Guess Simla gets a chance to learn not to piss off somebody on the path of rage. Nathan closed his eyes, releasing the gloating thrill of victory. It was made harder when he heard Simla's scream cut out with a thump as he impacted against the mountaintop. There was a cheer from the airs, and Nathan smiled as he let go of his rage. High-tier focused mind 7 achieved. You have leveled up to level 53. Congratulations, you have won a dangerous duel against a rival who sought to discredit you. When he opened his eyes, Nathan was calm. He was stained with blood from dozens of wounds. But his stamina was still full, and his clothes were even mostly intact, if cut in a few places, blood-stained and torn from the explosion. Nathan met Eldred's gaze, smirking slightly as he walked towards the dais next to the seal. The heavily armored man glared impotently, and Nathan could tell he was thinking about stopping Nathan somehow. But he glanced around, seeing the other adventurers watching, and subsided. Khazar merely frowned thoughtfully at Nathan, watching him walk up the steps with a vaguely frustrated expression. As he stepped atop the platform, Nathan looked around. The heirs were right behind him, and Simla was being fed a healing potion by his team. Kia gave Nathan a single nod, and Vihala raised her fist in support. All the adventurers of Gemor watched Nathan as he stood beside the beam of magic emerging from the seal. By the endings of Davrar and the wonders of Earth, I vow to fight the endings themselves. I will prevent them from happening at all if it can be done. May my class be stripped from me if I forswear. I will protect the people of Gemor from that which would assail them, be it monster, person, or ending. End of Book 1.